Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom! Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio / RV dining room, located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Once again, JJ Vance here, host of Operation GCD, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, folks of the interwebs, I will be your pilot and navigator. Oh, well, thanks for joining us here tonight, folks of the interwebs. I will be your pilot and navigator for this shenanigan infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And I'm not gonna lie to you, folks, got a real barn burner on deck here tonight for y'all. OJ Simpson did not do it. The great OJ debate. And I'll be joined here tonight with Cosmic Peach Julia, the host of Cosmic Peach Podcast. So thanks again for joining us here tonight, folks of the interwebs, to get a little GCD. And welcome, Julia, Cosmic Peach, host of the Cosmic Peach Podcast and fellow occult reject. How you doing this evening, Julia? Thanks for joining me here to get little GCD tonight.
Yeah, barn burner.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
This is going to be a good one, especially because as we were kind of saying before we got started, I'm actually hoping you can change my mind, because as of right now, I do not think, or I do think he did it. I do think he did it. So if you can change my mind, that would be great, because I love a new conspiracy theory.
I like it. No, I appreciate you joining me here. We'll have a nice conversation here. I use the term debate very sparingly, very loosely, because I figured we'd have a roundtable discussion on the points where of the OJ's, the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman that were attributed and colloquially known as the OJ Simpson murders. Despite he was acquitted for these charges by a court, a jury of his peers. And I have some statements from those jurors here throughout the evening, and some of the forensics that I have problems with, and the litany of characters involved in these circumstances. Notably, a lot of them surrounding one of my favorite characters here at Operation GCD, the legendary Hollywood producer Cocaine Bob Evans. So that'll be exciting. So no, it's you definitely use the term debate sparingly. So well, before we get started though, Julia, since this is your first time at Operation GCD, why don't you share with everybody your folks of the interwebs about your podcast, anything you want to plug? I'm obviously being a smart ass. I accused you of being a guest for the first time last week when you were on. So
yeah, no, I was gonna say this is the first time I've been on by myself, so I guess that is a first. But yeah, no, thanks for having me. I have Cosmic Peach podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and on Patreon. If you do want to work with me, you can find my link tree to get to my email on Instagram, and that's cosmic.peach.podcast. Don't send me a message on Instagram. Go to the link tree, hit the email button, send me an email.
There you go.
The inbox on Instagram is just like loaded with garbage, and it would be impossible to sift through all that stuff. So I love working with new people. I'm always down to join a conversation, but just email me. That's the best way to get a hold of me. And yeah. Oh, look at this. Give me a break. No way. OJ innocent. See, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
You're going to have to sell it to me, JJ. You're going to have to sell it to me.
A lot of folks have a lot of opinions. So, as far as I'm concerned, the only OJ related debate that should be had, if you consider all the facts of the circumstances, the only OJ debate left is the OJ debate of pulp or no pulp.
Ooh, I would go with pulp.
I'm a no pulp guy myself, but
really?
I'm obviously being jackass and sarcastic there because I think what I'm saying when it's polarizing, and that's the only OJ debate that's really left, in my opinion, is this was an event that was intended to be polarizing, right?
Sure.
Kind of like the Manson family murders were polarized, and kind of like the Idaho 4 murders that occurred at the University of Idaho on November 13th, 2022. That's also a very polarizing event. And lo and behold, these circumstances and events, despite being 30 years apart in each circumstance, right? You got the Manson family murders in 1969, you got the Nicole Brown Simpson Goldman murders in 1994, and then you got the Idaho murders in 2022, right? Despite these large swaths of time and great distances between these events, they are strangely interrelated. And I've done a couple comparisons on the Idaho 4 case to OJ here on Operation GCD Live, and I've discussed some more of the parapolitics surrounding that with the connections from some of the characters in the Idaho case, like the lead Idaho State Police Detective, Vicky Gooch, and her direct connections back to the Manson family murders. Are you familiar with that, Julie?
No. So what's going on with that?
So, one thing I talk about here a lot is the Idaho murders here on my podcast. In fact, Nick and I have done probably 20 some hours on the subject, but I've done a lot more just the parapolitics that I see connected to it, and how that case has evolved. My thoughts have evolved from not necessarily a simple murder, but something more to a large scale parapolitical boondoggle involving the likes of Jeffrey Epstein's friends, Sam Bankman-Fried, and money laundering, drug trafficking, and basically what I like to call Idaho Contra, because I compare it to Iran Contra, right? But the lead detective, Idaho State Police, no one knew this lady was so integral, right? So the murders occur in November 2022. The reports, not even the reports, but public hearings, because a lot of the case is sealed, right? So finally, public hearings 2 years later, we learn this lady, Idaho State Police Detective Victoria Gooch, was so integral in the interviewing of one of the surviving roommates in that case, and the actual DNA investigation leading to the alleged suspect, Brian Koberger, right? Well, her father was the protege of Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tate, U.S. Army Intelligence.
What?
Yeah.
No, fuck off.
Whose daughter Sharon Tate, actress Sharon Tate, was murdered at the Manson family murders, right? So this turned out to be a seminal event in Victoria Gooch's life. So her father and the way she tells the story in an interview she did about her kind of her history, right? She says that her father and they traveled to numerous army assignments, with her father under the command of Paul Tate, U.S. Army Intelligence. So they go from Greece to Chicago to then she says California, where her father then in 1970 begins a some sort of top secret job where she doesn't see him for, long periods of time, months at a time for the next few years, right? Well, in 1970, his boss, Paul Tate, went undercover in the hippie movement to investigate his daughter's death, Sharon Tate. Grew his hair out long and went undercover. So they moved to San Francisco Bay at the same time. So I presume whatever Victoria Gooch's father was doing was in support of his boss, Paul Tate.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
and she describes how this gets her into law enforcement and how she was not allowed to go back to Berkeley College after she moved to Idaho. So a lot of strange stuff there in that connection. And
mm-hmm.
I'll unpack some more of these connections later. But when we're talking the Manson case and the OJ case, there's some direct connections there. So the first officer on scene on the OJ case was a fellow by the name of Richard Wally, right? And he was a junior officer on the scene at the Tate Polanski house, working the crime scene.
What?
Yeah.
No.
Lead detective Philip Van Natter, right? He's a major figure in this quote unquote framing of OJ. I would argue he was a junior officer too at the Tate Polanski house back in '69.
So okay, let me ask you something like straight up, because this is something that me and my husband have talked about before, because he's of the mind that the Tate Polanski murder was staged in some way, and that perhaps Sharon isn't even dead.
There's an argument to be made there. I know there's a fellow by the name of Miles Mathis that's written a lengthy paper on a lot of these kind of psyop subjects. And while I don't agree with his conclusions in his Manson family analysis, because I've found some errors in his his argument, but he does bring up some excellent points to that regard of staging and stuff like that. So if you want to have a conversation on that in the future, I'm certainly into it. Because
well, I'm just wondering if you think that could be going on with the OJ case. Like, do you really believe that Nicole and Ron are dead?
There you go. Is it all part of the show? Is what you're asking? And I keep asking that same question around the Idaho 4 case, right? So the Idaho 4 case, we never saw a coroner's van. There was no funerals. Allegedly, all 4 victims cremated. There's no probate cases for these young adults who had property and debts and accounts and stuff like that for them to, transfer those accounts to, next of kin or whatever. It goes through probate, right? No record of probate, right? So there are a lot of questions surrounding these kind of things, and there's a distinct lack of blood at the scene, right, of that crime scene. Now, I wouldn't argue that with the Tate LaBianca house, but that doesn't mean the two correlate precisely like that either, right? So just because you have one, not the other, doesn't mean they're both not the same. But if you recall, the Cielo Drive murder scene was of the Tate Polanski home. That was a pretty gruesome scene.
Gruesome as fuck.
Yeah, those pictures were, they made it public pretty quickly. 2.5 years later, we have no Idaho crime scene pictures.
See, that's what bothers me, is that there should be. Just like, I know that the Nicole Brown case is weird, but we have plenty of photographs, right? Like,
we have lots of photographs.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
So
just because that's what I'm saying. When we start navigating these waters of where these things staged, we can't be like, well, this one has blood and this one doesn't, or these two have, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, even, right?
Mm-hmm. So where do you want to like do a little recap of the murders themselves and then go from there?
Yes, ma'am. That's what I was planning on doing. You read my mind there.
All right.
So we actually started this conversation the other day because we were on the Occult Reject show together, and I think I made a offhanded wise ass comment about Orenthal James Simpson, and you were commenting on how he's definitely did it, and and I was commenting on the Hertz guy, the Hertz rental car spokesperson, because obviously
Oh, it
Am I
kicked
back?
me
Am I
out
back?
again. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, you're
was that
good.
you or me? Okay. I cut out on my end too. So no, I was just saying, like, so we were talking about it, and you were of the mindset that he did it, and I'm long studied the forensics in this matter of this case, and I've long had issues with it, but I've only been more recent years looking into the kind of the processian angle, the process church angle, if you will. So in tracking the journeys of one Maury Terry, the author of The Ultimate Evil, he took a break from his studies and research and investigation into the New York angles of that stuff and started and dove headfirst into the OJ Simpson case. I think that's largely due to old cocaine Bob Evans, right? And his associations with in and around the OJ Simpson stuff, not the least of which one of OJ's attorneys, Robert Shapiro. So, but as far as this conversation started, yeah, we started there, and and I'm always happy to discuss Orenthal James Simpson, cocaine Bob Evans, and these kind of cult and contra angles, if you will.
I said every time you say OJ didn't do it, it makes my butthole clench because
that's right. You did say that.
I feel like there's a lot to suggest that he did. And well, obviously we'll get into that, but it's always been a case that's interested me. I recently just did a small series on major events that occurred in the 90s. And of course, this was one of them. And the high speed chase, or more so a low speed chase, if we're being
right.
honest, it's iconic, and it was all over the news, and there's not really, hey, what's up? There's not really been a lot of things that have happened like that since, with the sensationalism of the case. It was one of the last big ones, in my opinion. So it almost makes me wonder if it wasn't, set up in some way to sensationalize something, to get everyone's attention diverted away from something else that may have been going on at the time. I don't know.
Well, I think that's certainly possible, and I think another way to look at it maybe is also kind of along the same manner of, from a strategic level, not necessarily the down on who's stabbing who level, but you're right. It was a very polarizing and chaotic event. It's very very memorable. I remember where I was during the Bronco chase. I remember where I was when they read the verdict. Right, like you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a freshman in high school, but these were. I mean, even at that age, everyone had their eyes, tuned to it. And I think more people watched the verdict than they watched the Apollo 11 moon landing, if I remember correctly.
That is so crazy to me. And that's also why I think it has to be by design in some way. But I was born in 1994, so obviously I wasn't around to witness any of this. But,
right.
I was born in November of 94, so I've only ever seen it from like the back end. But what I will tell you is my mom was obsessed with it.
Sure.
I can remember her talking about how huge it was and how, but it's like, it makes you wonder if it wasn't some kind of George Floydian, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit and all of that. It's like very George Floydian kind of in that way.
What if it's both?
See, that's my thing. It's like I can't say either way. It could be both.
Yeah, what if it's both? So, what if there was an individual who you needed to take out in a drug trafficking network, and then you wanted to also, in a utilitarian nature, was these processing crimes kind of do in their whole hog effect of things, right? When I say the whole hog effect, is, they use the whole hog. They're going to profit from every aspect of the circumstances and situation. For example, one thing that I allege is prominent within this kind of network is depicted in the film Inherent Vice, story by Thomas Pynchon and a movie by Paul Thomas Anderson, where this in Los Angeles in 1970, there's this powerful drug trafficking network that involves Mafia, cult people, right? It involves politicians, it involves law enforcement, it involves actors, right, and lawyers, right? So I would assert that's what we're seeing here in around 1994. It's the same network, it's just evolved, right? But in that network in 1970, they're describing in that storyline how the cult is importing heroin, getting folks hooked on heroin, then profiting off of the drug rehabs, then profiting off of the dentists. They have dentists as well, and there's dentists associated with Charles Manson. So,
oh my God, that's crazy. You know, so, I watched Inherent Vice for the first time like 2 nights ago. So it's so crazy you brought that up. I just watched it, for the first time. So
you know exactly. So you know the Golden Fang. You know the Golden Fang. What I'm talking about.
All that, like with the dentists, I know exactly what you're talking about. And so. I mean, that's why I always have to wonder, because all of this stuff is so multi-layered, and it's like you said, actors, politicians, dentists, you name it, PIs, they're all in on it in some way. But
would you believe in Inherent Vice that they're telling the Manson story? Again, they're telling this process tale, right?
They are telling that similar kind of story, because at first I had to sit there and think to myself, like, what did I just watch? Because it's kind of disjointed and you have to like really concentrate on what's going on in the movie to understand it. And I love Joaquin Phoenix. He's one of my faves. I love it. Pretty much everything he's in. But if anybody hasn't watched that yet, it's definitely worth it, because it's exactly like JJ saying, it's like a little conspiracy buffet in there.
Oh yeah, well let me break down the Manson stuff and tie us back into the OJ stuff here. So in the film, you see Owen Wilson's character plays this Laurel Canyon surf sax player that faked his death and is now working as a COINTELPRO guy, working for the cult. He's playing like 5 different sides, right? So, but he fakes his death and help with the feds, right? And to go undercover and this stuff. If you think about it, that's a lot like Charles Manson, right? Or Bobby Beausoleil, right?
Yes, for sure. Bobby Beausoleil, for sure. Yeah,
right.
Both of them.
Manson's lieutenant, right? So then you also have characters like Bigfoot Bjornson, right? Josh Brolin's he's a lead detective in robbery homicide, right? Now again, this is 1970. Philip Van Adder's still a rookie cop, only been on the force for like 4 years at that point. But I suspect that is an amalgamation of characters within robbery homicide, notably Philip Van Adder, who again was at the Tate LaBianca scene apparently as well on that case. I'm sorry, I think he was at the Bianca scene, and I think the other guy, Richard Wally, who was the first on scene at the Nicole Brown Simpson murder, he was at the Tate Polanski house. Both rookie officers, though, and both again on the OJ case. But I would argue Bigfoot Bjornson is a play on Philip Van Adder, this Norwegian, cop dude, right?
That's so crazy. That is so crazy. Yeah.
And then they reference the Manson family numerous times throughout the film. So, and then you have the booby hatch up in Ojai, as they describe it, the loony bin, right, where the cult's operating these rehab for the folks to get off of the drugs, right? And again, they just put them, and they even explain it. It's a cyclical event. They just keep putting the folks back on that cycle, right? So, and the cult and this network, this processing network, as I describe it, they're the ones who are profiting off of every aspect of that. So if you in that regard, if you think about these chaotic events and how they're trying to do some social engineering, I suspect you can still have a real murder. You can still have somebody within that network that you need to take out for X, Y, or Z reason, and then you also, one of their seemingly signature moves of these kind of processing and murders is dependent on somebody else. So you would probably have folks within that network within the police, right, and also some folks outside of it, both working collectively dependent on OJ, because I will agree, there are some very circumstantial evidence surrounding that matter of OJ, but when you put in the timeline, it doesn't work out. It's the same thing with the Idaho 4. The Idaho authorities have a very loose circumstantial case against that suspect, Koberger, but you put it in this timeline and apply other scrutiny to the facts, and it don't work out. But if you have those circumstances, you need to take somebody out, you frame somebody, but then you're still going to profit off it, right? So what did we, in that regard, what did we see in 1994 was the kind of the birth of this court TV business, right, with the OJ case.
So, wasn't it one of the first? Well, they televised Ted Bundy's trial, But it's got to be one of the first ones.
24/7. I think this is the first one they did from start to finish.
Okay. I knew it was the first to be something.
Yeah, and on that, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a big part of how I evaluate this case. The people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson. So the murders occurred on June 12th, 1994, right? And then the trial begins in January 24th, 1995 through October 3rd of 1995, right? So during that time, we had basically wall-to-wall coverage from June of 94, June 13th of 94, when OJ turned himself in without a warrant, subjected himself to blood samples and DNA samples without a warrant, right? Volunteered these things. I think that's important to note. He did that. He flew back from Chicago and did that on the 13th when they called him there. So, because he flew red eye over to Chicago because he had a golf tournament with the Hertz rental car executives because he was their big spokesperson, had been for, I think, close to 15 years by that point. Strangely enough, it seems the Menendez brothers' father hired him in that job.
Dude, I was going to mention the Menendez brothers in connection with this case.
Yeah.
Should I do it now or should I? I'm gonna wait. Actually, I'm gonna wait.
Yeah,
finish this first.
We can get into that here in a bit if you'd like. For sure, I'd like to hear what you got because the Menendez brothers' father, before he was over there an RCA music executive in the 80s, he was the vice president of Hertz Rental Car, dating back to I think 77, and when OJ, I believe, was hired in 78 as their national spokesperson. So I have no documents or receipts of these matters, but I presume the vice president of North America operations for Hertz Rental Car had some role in hiring a national spokesperson for America, right? They both live in Los Angeles. I don't know if the Menendez brothers have connections to Scientology, but I've long suspected that because OJ had just joined Scientology right around that time. I think it was 77.
Fucking Scientology.
Yeah, so he gets this contract with Hertz right after he does. He gets that. I think he gets that Capricorn 1 movie, and I believe he gets this Hertz contract right after that. And he had just joined Scientology. I'm not saying there's, correlation versus causation, but it certainly seems like there's more to it with the Menendez folks, especially.
100.
Their murders go on. What was 93?
The Menendez brothers.
Yeah, when was that murder?
I think that
89. 89. Okay.
Oh, you already pulled it up. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that was an 80s thing, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, they were apprehended in 1990. Oh, well, so that's interesting. So Charles Manson's friend, Ira Reiner, was the district attorney for Los Angeles still at that time in 1990. So he would have been prosecuting that case. That's interesting.
Everything is so fucking connected.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll get into some more of those characters. Reiner's an interesting character, and he was the district attorney from 84 to 92. And relative to Bob Cocaine Evans, he was the district attorney for the Cotton Club murders, where Bob was an unindicted co-conspirator, along with the Medellin cartel's #1 dude in America's wife, Karen Greenberger. She was the indicted co-conspirator of Bob in the murder of Roy Radin. So, Cocaine Bob, that is. So, we can definitely talk more about the Menendez, but it is interesting what's popping off at the very same time as the OJ case. I believe the trial started on the same day, and that's the case of Heidi Fleiss.
Heidi who?
Fleiss? Are you familiar with Heidi Fleiss?
No. What's
Hollywood
this?
Madam? Oh, yeah. This is, she dated a lot of A-list stars like Charlie Sheen, Tom Sizemore.
Really?
Yeah. She was good friends with Nicole Brown Simpson.
And she's dead?
She's not dead, but she got busted for running a prostitution ring in LA County.
Oh my God. Shut up. And she was friends with Nicole? Did I lose you? JJ?
Did I cut out?
You cut out a little bit. You're saying she was friends with Nicole?
Yeah. Oh, they were tight. They were real tight. So I'm not going to say Nicole was a recruiter in that network, but she certainly has the hallmarks of it.
Oh my God. That's going to make even more sense when I say what I got to say about Nicole.
So let me just double check here. Go ahead. I'm double checking the date of her trial. What were you going to say about Nicole?
I don't know if I'm ready to jump right into it yet on Nicole, but there's some stuff about her that, I mean, I don't have any like solid evidence of this other than, you know, what I can see in pictures, but it would appear based on her skeleton that Nicole was born a biological male.
You're talking about the beefy
And
jawline.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, blondes tend to be pretty jolly, and she is of a very jolly ethnicity, if you want to call it that. Her deep Germanic roots.
There's some stuff about like the kids not looking like her. Her kneecaps and her elbows.
You've gone a little deeper on your trans investigation than I have, ma'am. I'm into it. Don't get me wrong, because I'm glad you bring this point up, because it's interesting. You have to consider how these two met. To understand who Orenthal James Simpson was in the events leading up to June 12th, 1994, the night of the murder that occurred, and according to the state's timeline, approximately 10:32 to 10:42. Again, you start adding scrutiny, you start putting these things under a microscope the state presents, and it makes no sense. It does not comport whatsoever. In fact, they would later discredit some of their own eyewitnesses and ear witnesses from the matter that were supposed to testify for the state, because they kept changing the timeline. And that's one thing we see in the Idaho 4 cases. After the probable cause is written, they keep molding a different timeline and changing facts. And that happened in the Orenthal James Simpson case. And in doing so, they ostracized a number of fairly wealthy, folks there in the Brentwood area of Los Angeles. These are wealthy homes. This is a high-class neighborhood next to Beverly Hills, in between Beverly Hills and Malibu. And, this is, they pissed some folks off, you know what I mean? So, again, folks who thought OJ was guilty, they thought he did it. They were going to testify for the prosecution, but suddenly their details and their eyewitness or near witness reports don't comport with the timeline of events that was getting shifted and changed over time, right? So a lot of that happened.
Well, what time do you think it went down?
I think it went down around 10:20.
10:20 p.m.
That's the first inclination of activity going on over there. And I suspect the law enforcement is a lot more than they ever released in these matters, because, there was for example, Ron Goldman's pager continued to go off for hours following his murder, his apparent murder, right? I mean, we have photographs of these bodies, at least, right? Again, Idaho, we don't have any photographs, but Goldman seems to have been, again, delivering cocaine through this network of Italian restaurants owned by the Mafia, and one of the owners in this network is actor James Caan, who has no one to credit but Bob Cocaine Evans for his career in Hollywood.
Okay, let me just, so we can clarify, because it never made sense to me either why he would, they say the only reason why he was murdered is because he had to bring a pair of shades over to Nicole because they were her favorite pair of sunglasses or whatever.
Similar.
Like that
You're on target. You're on target.
I mean, that never made sense to me.
No, and again, so that's what I'm talking about. How do all these folks know each other, right? So it seems to be cocaine seems to be the connecting principle in a lot of these things, and it's not surprised that old Cocaine Bob's nearby, right? So
right. So like the whole he was like collateral damage, like, oh, I was just on my way to drop off Nicole's shades and I got fucking dusted in the process. Like, that never made sense to me, like why he would be there.
Well, it doesn't. So I think that was a setup. So I think he was sent over there. He did get sent over there with a pair of eyeglasses. So the story sold is Nicole Brown Simpson and her family, her mother and children and whatnot, they all went to dinner together, right, at this fancy Italian restaurant, Mezzaluna, right? And it's rumored she was regular there, but what they don't describe is the further details of those circumstances. But Ron Goldman was a waiter there, and again, I would argue he's a lot more than a waiter there, because that restaurant got popped for cocaine trafficking, and that whole network of restaurants did shortly thereafter the murders. And they all closed down. Yeah. And Ron Goldman had two friends, one of which was a waiter at Mezzaluna, who got murked after he did. One of them got murked a year beforehand. The other one 6 months after him. They all got real stabby. You know what I mean?
Oh
So,
my God, JJ, what the fuck?
That's what I'm saying. The law enforcement had a great idea of the timeline based upon that pager. And the last time he recognized the page, right? Because it was blowing up by numerous reports. It was blowing up. You know,
for all the, because he was probably supposed to make a couple drops that night and he never showed up. Oh,
exactly.
That makes so much more sense. Holy shit.
They've known the timeline. So this whole thing was not, there was no response to these murders, and I'll get back to that in a minute as I build up how these folks know each other, right? So they know each other through Mezzaluna, but what's not described is Nicole's roommate from 1992 to 1994, whom she would travel with to Aspen, Colorado frequently, because it seems like they were dealing some yayo together. He was the manager of those restaurant group, right? So it was like 3 or 4, I think it was 3 or 4 restaurants. And again, it's owned by 2 made mobsters, and one of the minority owners, and one of them is James Caan, old Cocaine Bob's friend. That comes into play later because all these folks get busted as well for cocaine trafficking when those restaurants go down. And James Caan puts up his house for bail for one of these guys, right?
Whoa.
Yeah. He almost faces charges himself at one point because he's harboring a known fugitive. One of the other made mobster, Joey Ippolito, apparently when he skips bond at a sentencing hearing in New Jersey, he's hiding out at Caan's house a couple weeks later, and they don't ever charge Caan for that though. These are all events preceding what's going on. So what I'm saying is that whole network of, that mafia-owned network group was interesting. So Nicole's roommate, this Keith fella, he was the manager of those restaurants, and they had one restaurant in Aspen. I think one was in Malibu, one was in Brentwood, I believe there, and maybe 2 in Malibu. Nonetheless, and I think a pizza place in Beverly Hills. So she's traveling to Aspen with this guy. He's the manager of those restaurants. He's dating one of Heidi Fleiss's hookers the entire time from 92 to 94. The reason it seems like OJ Orenthal James Simpson decided that he needed to go nuts on his ex-wife, and which would result in numerous domestic violence phone calls, was directly over her activities relative to this cocaine business and Heidi Fleiss, because apparently she was having cocaine and hookers at her home, and he did not like that in front of his children.
That's what it was about?
Yeah, so the October 1993, so she's murdered June 12th, 1994. The October 1993 call that the prosecution used against him, you can hear him in the background screaming things about tabloids, cocaine, and hookers, right? So he's talking about Heidi Fleiss, her hookers. Again, this Keith dude was, dating one of these hookers for a couple of years there. She was friends with Heidi Fleiss. Whether or not she was a recruiter in that network, I would argue that's certainly possible. And
probably.
Right. And then, so she very familiar with that whole trade, at least. Right. And, and again, she's dating the dude from Mezzaluna. So she has more than a passing relationship with Ron Goldman. Right. She may not know him that well, but his boss lived with her for 2+ years. But it seems like after that October 93 call, when he's screaming on, in the background, she's calling 911. He thought she was talking to her mother, which she would frequently do when they would argue, apparently. So he's screaming those details so that her mother can understand what kind of whore her daughter was being.
Wow.
She also did not press charges when the cops responded to that call, but it was all used against him in the trial.
So you think, because I actually played a snippet from that phone call when I covered this in my 90s series. And I mean, she definitely sells the whole I'm a battered woman thing. And like, didn't she have like journals or something where she was like, if something happens to me, it's him?
Well, she did get hit by him, I believe. That was the 1990 incident or 91. That's what caused the separation, I believe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you think incident,
well, I would argue it's probably no different than the 93 incident. I don't think we have the same amount of information on that one. But part of the 93 incident allegedly dates back to 91. So apparently she was in debt to Larry Flint for a large volume of cash due to some cocaine dealings back in 91. So this is that tabloid stuff he was screaming about. So apparently he got involved with trying to pay off that debt by doing a pornography for Larry Flint. she was in debt to Larry Flint. Back to Cocaine Bob and friends, the two assassins that are in prison for the murder of Roy Radin, by order of apparently Cocaine Bob and Karen Greenberger, the Medellin cartel's #1 dude, America's wife. Well, that was, those two dudes worked for Larry Flint. Bill Mincer was a bodyguard for Larry Flint. So here we have her apparently in debt to that and causing outrage by him. Again, I'm not advocating this behavior. What I'm saying is I don't think it's been properly described. He's just some lunatic who beats his wife. There was a very tumultuous relationship, it appears, and it largely seems to have been an issue of cocaine.
So the main issue is his wife got herself involved in some crackheadedness, basically acting like
apparently repeatedly.
Right. Messing with some prostitution, nasty stuff, and some all right. You think he got violent with her because she was convoluting with all these side deals?
According to his own, I think it was Cochran's book, the 93 incident was solely around the issues of this cocaine you hear about him screaming about in the background.
Okay.
Cocaine and hookers. Again, those hookers are Heidi Fleiss's people. Again, so in 94, right after that incident, she moves out of that home into the home she gets murdered in on Bundy Drive, right? So also, so you have her, this Keith fellow who's the manager of these restaurants, these mob restaurants where the coke trafficking is going on, and Goldman works at one of them. You have Cato Kalin. They're all living with OJ's kids, 2 kids at this house on another part of Brentwood. So he apparently, OJ's like, after that October incident, was like, no more. This is done. You're moving. This Keith dude's moving out. No more Heidi Fleiss over here. These were allegedly the terms that he described. She then moves into that Bundy residence. I believe he's paying for it. And then Cato Kalin, who's living there as well, is her friend, not his, right? He moves him into his guest house. That's how Cato Kalin ends up at the Rockingham guest house of Orenthal James Simpson, because he thought he was a negative influence on his ex-wife and kids and wanted him under closer scrutiny, right?
So because he was a crackhead, you think? Or I
think they all were. I mean, I don't think OJ is guilty of not doing coke. You know what I mean? I think he was just trying to bring some reason to these matters, if you will. And
for his kids.
For his kids. And again, this relationship that was sold by the prosecution, I don't think stands up to scrutiny. So 3 weeks prior to the murder, Nicole Brown Simpson hosts a pizza party for their kids at the Rockingham estate with OJ, with Cato.
So, my dog's barking. Sorry. So what do you think about like the violent nature of the deaths, though? Because that's part of the reason why I think he did do it.
Well, I think that speaks to the violent nature of the Manson family crimes and the violent nature of the Idaho 4 murders. I think it goes with the territory of this, as Manson called it, making it look witchy.
Okay, but so the only thing I would argue is two things. I don't feel like Ron Goldman was killed as violently as Nicole.
Oh, he was.
So you feel like he was?
We can we'll go over the autopsies. I got that all.
Well, so that might clear things up for me, because from what I can remember, in my opinion, it looked like somebody took their sweet ass time slicing and dicing and practically decapitating Nicole. And
she was caught by surprise.
You're like a rush job on Ron.
No, you're mostly accurate. They did catch her by surprise from behind, I believe, and nearly did decapitate her. You're right. That's an accurate statement.
So to me, it always looked like to practically decapitate somebody, but not spend that much time with Ron, would suggest to me that he wasn't the primary target, but he needed to die because he was there.
Well, I see what you're saying, and that's certainly possible, but I would argue that the bulk of the attention in the murder was concentrated on Ron. I would argue there's at least 3 individuals, possibly 4, who committed this crime, one of which was responsible for the murder of Nicole, one of which was a lookout, and the other two fought Ron Goldman, because whoever fought Ron Goldman, man, he put up a fight. We can go over some of those autopsies, and we'll look at OJ's body too in his pictures, and you can tell the one cut that he has on his left hand middle finger is from the glass that he broke. His story was when they called him in Chicago that morning of the 13th, he was upset, dropped a glass, and when he was picking up the glass, the shattered glass from his hotel room floor, he cut his finger. It seems plausible, because what doesn't seem plausible is you look at the pictures of Ron Goldman and say that he got into a fight and got stabbed like 19 times and some stuff slashed, and OJ got a little cut, because Goldman's got bruises from head to toe. He's got defensive wounds all over his hands. I mean, it's alleged that he was expert in martial arts. I don't know if that's true, but what I can tell you is the dude put up a hell of a fight, and whoever he was fighting, they're going to have some marks.
So what about Nicole being like practically decapitated? Like, don't you feel like whoever did her had some passion behind that?
Well,
that it was personal, like that there was some passion in that?
I do think it was personal, yeah. And I'll get into some of the motives on that too, from where I'm at with that stuff relative to these kind of processing crimes. So one of the aspects, and that is not, I don't think, considered oftentimes with someone like Bob Cocaine Evans, who's this kind of process figure of a major regard there in Los Angeles, according to investigations of Maury Terry and whatnot, did a great job, and not the only one, but he obviously did a great job on that with Bob's actions, Cocaine Bob and the Cotton Club murders there. But you look at their theology within the process, and they're Nazis. So you look at somebody like Mark Fuhrman, who's a very integral character in all of these things, and he's a Nazi. I'm not saying that without evidence. There's a 42-page internal affairs investigation that was being written at the time of the trial that was published in October during the trial, and I think shortly before the trial ended, maybe. And not only was he a Nazi, he perjured himself, was charged with a felony as a result of which during the trial, but the prosecution knew this dude was under investigation for all sorts of shady shit. And that investigation yielded 40 some pages of evidence supporting the Nazi activities of Mark Fuhrman, not the least of which, according to Johnny Cochran's book, Fuhrman would wear Nazi rank underneath the lapel of his LAPD officer uniform. So in that regard, when you have part of these Turner Diary kind of things, right, with this theology of this kind of white nationalist movement, that's one of the things they call for, is to decapitate the essentially the race traitors, right? So she's a blonde-haired, fair, German who's had children with a black man. That doesn't sit well with a number of folks. In fact, the FBI released their documents on Orenthal James Simpson after he died, and two things can be yielded from that relative to this conversation we're having right now at the moment, and that is they were more deeply involved in the physical evidence than initially led on by the state in the 1990s, and because after someone dies, I guess they just release whatever they got, as they claim, at least, right? And then the other thing is that they were getting threats from white nationalists preceding the murders. Both Nicole and OJ were. So
that's where the decapitation comes in, because that to me has always been the selling point, is like, if I were to have to murder someone, unless I was incredibly angry at that person, I don't know if I could go to the lengths of like practically decapitating them. You know what I'm saying?
For sure. So before we go further in the Nicole OJ timeline and how they kind of came together and emphasize these kind of hood rat activities that surround the entire nature of their relationship, if you ask me, and that is, again, their friend circles as well, right? Their recreational activities, cocaine. This whole Mark Fuhrman's a Nazi thing. So 2 months after the murders in October of '94, this dude wrote a book. His name's Steven Singular. I think he published it maybe during the trial or shortly thereafter.
I'm familiar with him.
Steven Singular. Okay. So he gets a phone call from the prosecutor, a deputy prosecutor, who tells him all these intimate details of their investigation. That they're like, hey, this dude's planting evidence. Here's the evidence he planted. Talking about Fuhrman. It's all part of this white nationalist movement, right? He's connected to these people in Idaho. So he was connected. He ends up retiring to Sandpoint, Idaho after he gets fired / retired from LAPD in December of 95. However, this is August of 94, and this LA deputy prosecutor's calling him and saying, look, the prosecutor's office has lost their shit. And the author, I don't think he's ever named the prosecutor, but there was a couple of prosecutors that were public deputies. You could probably assume it was one of them. They were publicly against Marcia Clark and gang in the prosecution, right?
And he said Idaho?
Yeah, so he says Mark Fuhrman's connected to this white nationalist group out of Idaho that this Steven Singular dude wrote a book about, right? So this white nationalist group launched this national campaign of terror, if you will, right? Back in 1983, I think it was. They ended up robbing a bunch of banks. They murdered a radio host in Denver, Colorado. That's what Steven Singular wrote his book about. This group was called The Order. Hollywood just made another movie about these people. So this deputy prosecutor is telling the dude who wrote a book about that Berg murder at the hands of these Nazis from northern Idaho and how they all launched this plan. So he's saying that they launched a new plan for a 10-year anniversary of the Berg murder, right? This is the story that the Singular guy gets, right? And he goes, well, what do you want me to do? I'm a journalist in Denver. He goes, you work for the prosecutor's office. He says, yeah, they don't want any of this stuff here. They're going a different direction. And he goes, what do I do? And they said, take it to the defense. So he actually did contact the defense and met with the defense. Again, this is early on in the investigation. And he writes about it in his book, but the details he conveys to the defense end up playing out in court. And I'll get into some of that when we get into the forensics. But, he gets a call about these white nationalists launching another campaign of terror, right? There's another number of events that are allegedly connected to this, but part of that campaign of terror was to kill at this national meeting in northern Idaho in 1994 near Sandpoint, where Fuhrman lives today, and has lived since 95, right? So he's got deep connections to these folks, right? So whether or not it seems like he played a very prominent role in that, but it seems like what you're describing was very personal, right? This is this was their intent, was to make it look that way too.
Yeah, so I guess that would make sense that they're trying to make it look a certain way as well, because it's like I said, Ron was sliced up, like they stabbed him multiple times, but to go to the lengths of what they did with Nicole, I feel like if we're going to go with OJ did not do it, they certainly did a good job making it look like a crime of passion, for sure.
I think that's an accurate statement, and that is the professed nature of their goals as well. So here we have Alan Berg was murdered June 18th, 1984 by a white supremacist group named The Order. Again, so this is this film that just got released here, 2024, from Big Hollywood Picture. That's based upon the murder, this campaign of these domestic terror events by this white nationalist group launched out of Hayden Lake, Sandpoint, Idaho. Again, Fuhrman's connected these people back to this point, according to whatever the prosecutor's office developed, and then later kicked off that the internal affairs investigation, right? Was part of this. This was some of the same stuff. So they didn't I don't think they made that part public, the Idaho part, but according to Steven Singular's book, it was that was the circumstances. So
well, and Steven Singular, how I was able to come across him is he's actually done a lot of good work on John Benet Ramsey as well. And connecting all of the I mean, he does a great job connecting all the bigwigs and all the eyes wide shutters of Colorado with the Ramsey family, and some crazy stuff that happened with John Benet. So I mean, I definitely know this guy does great research, so I was surprised to hear you even bring him up in regards to this, because I had no idea he ever was involved or wrote anything about it.
Oh yeah, he published this in like I said, January of 95.
Legacy of Deception. Wow.
The trial hadn't even started yet. Again, he met with folks in August of 94 over these matters, because again, he got tipped off by some legitimate sources, and again, it apparently checked out. So it was because he wrote this book, Talk to Death, so that LA prosecutor was like, the people you wrote about in this book in 87 are responsible here for these activities here in 94, right?
Damn.
And Fuhrman's associated with it all. And again, Fuhrman retires up there afterwards, right? And that's where he lives today, where he's been providing commentary for the last 2.5 years on the Idaho 4 murders.
Really?
Yes, ma'am. I can't make this shit up.
Yeah, I mean, that's too much. That's too much.
It's a little bit, right? It's a little bit out there, right?
Yeah. All right. So actually, I need to run to the restroom really quick, but I noticed in the comments section, somebody said, do you think that Khloe Kardashian is OJ Simpson's?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And I just wanted to say really quick before I run to the restroom that yes, I do think that Khloe is OJ Simpson's, but
absolutely. Well, I actually have a brief intermission for us while you do that. I have a halftime.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Hang on just a second. I'll be right back.
Sounds good. I don't think that was the right video. Stand by 1 second, please. And oh, this is our intermission because I can't find the other one I had. But here's Orenthal James Simpson confirming that he went clear, Scientology style. I believe this interview is from 1984.
At one point, I felt I had reached the state of clear, right?
Which is what?
Which is in Scientology, I guess, is the area where you you're one with all, see all, know all. At least that's the way I interpreted it at the time.
You got to that state?
I thought I had, or I had from time to time reached that state, especially as an athlete. Sometimes you just feel that you're in total control of your surroundings and can literally will everything around you.
So, you don't have to take my word for it, folks of the interwebs. Orenthal James Simpson, was definitely a Scientologist. So at the time of the murders, he had just finished starring in Naked Gun, I believe 33 1/3. They just maybe had released it or had just completed filming. Let's see here. It was released March 18th of 1994. And then again, the murders occur on June 12th, 1994. So this it's interesting because I always assert that Scientologists stick together in these, especially in these Hollywood productions, and you'll find Orenthal James Simpson here along with Priscilla Presley starring in the Naked Gun franchise there. And Priscilla Presley, obviously apparently a multi-decade Scientologist to the point where Lisa Marie grew up in it and apparently died while still being a Scientologist.
Thank you. I always thought that he must have done it because of his weird Scientology weirdness and the fact that he was in some other movie where they like trained him how to use a switchblade knife or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I've heard these tales of the Navy stuff. I think that the Navy SEALs movie he was doing. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if I put a lot of credence into that, but you never know, right? Maybe he got that job to set him up for these murders, right? You see what I'm saying? See the amount of planning I'm saying probably went into this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So if you had to just like sum it up in the best way you could, what was the motive to get rid of Nicole?
Well, that's a good question. Let me finish building their backstory here, and we'll get to that. I think here. Did you see this though while you were away? I played this clip.
At one point, I felt I had reached the state of clear, right?
Which is
I don't ever want to go clear. That's what happens when you go clear. But
yeah, I left my headphones on so I could hear whatever the clip was.
Nice.
But I mean, he's a weird guy, and it's easy to pin it on him because he makes himself look like shit.
Yeah, and you just got to look at who these people associate with, and that's what I was kind of getting at with their backstory, right? So this is, the late '80s. They're doing fly stuff, cocaine stuff, Larry Flynn stuff, right? And they get married in '85 and essentially split in 91, but they met in '77, right? She was a waitress at a bar in Hollywood. He was a star, right? And again, at the same time, he's getting associated with Scientology, right? At the same time he meets her. So I don't know if her associations with Scientology, but I suspect she had some, in that regard. Because again, that's when they first link up. He's actually married to his first wife at that point, right? When the comment about whether or not Khloe Kardashian was that the Kardashian? Khloe Kardashian was his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She looks exactly like his daughter from his first marriage.
I haven't seen her.
I'll bring that up here in a minute. They're both kind of linebacker like. I'm just saying they could have played fullback if they were men.
Wow. And so
and look at Chloe versus her sisters, right?
Right.
Size wise.
So I know she's went through a lot of plastic surgery recently. I don't know if she's gotten on Ozempic or what. It looks like she's gotten her skeletal structure completely redone. I mean, it looks like they've broken her jaw and done all kinds of stuff to get her to look more feminized. But
sure,
if you see old pictures of Chloe, not new pictures of Chloe, like OG Chloe, like, dude, that is 100% OJ's kid, in my opinion.
I agree. And I apologize. I was referring to his daughter with Nicole. Sydney and Chloe look a lot alike. Bring up a picture right now for us here.
Okay, perfect, because I'm so curious.
I think they're roughly the same age. So they used to vacation every year together.
Robert
Kardashian and OJ go back to, I think, 72. They were tight.
That's his first daughter?
That's his daughter with Nicole. Yeah, that's Sydney.
See, I don't think she looks anything like Nicole. This goes back to the whole Nicole is a biological man thing, because it's like, I don't know, dude.
Don't see a lot of Nicole in there, do you?
I don't. And like, if you could you pull up some pictures of Nicole, like with her 5 o'clock shadow? It appears to be in, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
There are things that I've noticed just, and before I get roasted in the comment section, let me just make this clear. I have been following what I would consider to be reputable sources who look at celebrities, and they can tell you whether or not they're a biological man or a biological woman based on their bone structure. The same way that archaeologists can dig up skeletons in Egypt and tell you which ones are male and which ones are female. You can do it with living people too. It's not that hard. And there is a lot of discrepancies in Nicole Brown Simpson's skeleton that would suggest she was a biological man. I'm not.
Yeah. I mean, she definitely looks kind of got some manly qualities, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm not saying that this is absolutely 100%, but I mean, the jawline, the kneecaps, the elbows, for sure. Her hands are huge, and I'm sure there's another one. There's a picture of her and OJ at like some kind of red carpet event. I think their kids are with them. And she's got like the whole 5 o'clock shadow thing going on. I don't know if you can see that picture on there.
I'll bring that up here one moment, please. So here's one of the, I mean, again, there's lots of these family photos together with the Kardashians, the Jenners, and the Simpsons. You got Nicole right here and OJ. So,
close there could be for comfort.
Well, what you're describing here makes a lot of sense where my head's at, man, because these folks, what I'm getting at, you got to look at these folks and who they're dealing with, their activities, their social life, etc. And none of it pans out well for these folks. So I imagine they were probably into some weird sexual like proclivities and activities. So we can see that through the Jenner family, who's got all sorts of trans stuff all around it, including some.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like, I hate to say guilt by association, but they're all kind of into this stuff.
Well, exactly. So some of the Jenner girls, they're baby daddies or something. Like one of them's a baby daddy's a rapper, and he openly dates trans.
They're all, I'm telling you, they're all into this stuff, and it's super easy to fake a pregnancy bump. That's some that, I mean, Hollywood does it all the time. It's super easy to fake a pregnancy bump. So I don't want people coming after me in the comments talking about, well, there's pictures of her pregnant. Yeah, I could look pregnant tomorrow if I wanted to, right?
I can bring up Beyonce fake pregnancy bump she got caught with. I can bring up another one if you want me to, just show folks. Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron claims to have gained 70 pounds of a beer belly for a part she was playing a pregnant lady. Now I would argue that's her name's really Charlie. Her father's a multi-millionaire South African banker, if I remember correctly.
Dude, that's what I'm saying. It's like there are photos of Nicole, and somebody put in the comments, isn't Nicole Megan Kelly? Megan Kelly has actually addressed that, and I think it's a fun theory to, toss around. But no, I think the transgender actual Nicole is dead,
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, they say
I kind of like it in concept. I don't know the details of it, but I kind of like it in concept.
I mentioned it in my series because a lot of people bring that up. But I will say that Megan Kelly herself has actually addressed that. And while they do look similar, I do think that the trans Nicole that was married to OJ Simpson is dead. I don't know who did it. I want to think that it was OJ because he's fucking weird. But I'm super open. Like, you've already got me halfway on the fence wondering what the hell's going on. See, look at Beyonce's fake bump.
Yeah.
Look at this stuff. Look at this stuff.
There was another star, I think it was Miley Cyrus that did it. You know what I mean? So like these things happen again. Charlize Theron, she claims she gained, she did it all for a part. You know what I mean? She claimed it was all beer belly.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And again, so Charlize Theron, she said to two young African children, you've won the lottery. Congratulations. You're an American now. I adopted you. Also, congratulations. I'm changing your gender. You're now a girl.
Oh, yeah. They love to do that, don't they?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Look at
that's what kind of crazy shit is that, right?
Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt did that with their gaggle of geese.
Right.
Oh, it's a boy, now it's a girl, now it's a boy again. Yep. I mean, they literally they love that stuff.
Look at the Smiths.
Love it. Yes.
These Scientology schooled children of Will and Jada Pinkett Smith.
Well, you know what they say, that the girl was named after the dad because that's the biological male.
Right.
And that the boy was named after the mom because that's the biological female. It's Willow and Jaden. Like, come on.
Right.
Now.
So Charlize Theron says playing pregnant in Tully was more physically taxing than Mad Max or Atomic Blonde. Get out of town, dude. What are you talking about?
Get the fuck out, man.
This
is what I'm saying. It's like, if there was motivation outside of OJ to kill Nicole in this way, in this very, very brutal way, I think that there's so many levels to it. It's hard to imagine what all they were into, but I mean, there's even talks that OJ's son from his first marriage killed her because
I think that's
weird sex.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that theory. I think it spends a lot of the actual evidence that doesn't exist against OJ and then tries to spin it off onto this guy. So I think all that's well designed and by plan. But would you agree with me? Charlize Theron looks pregnant, right?
Yeah, I'm sure she would love us to think she was pregnant.
This is not on the film. This is during the filming, but not on the set. So she claimed that was a 70 pound beer belly she gained. What kind of woman puts all of her weight in a beer belly? I'm gonna go with no woman at all, right?
No, probably no woman at all. I would say that by the look of her face, I don't know, like it's disproportionate to me to be a beer belly. You know what I'm saying? Are you frozen? Oh, JJ.
Yeah,
I'm frozen.
I'm back.
I said it looks proportionate to me.
Really? Because I would expect more weight in the arms and maybe even the hips or something like that. And literally, when there's other photographs from the film and whatnot, and scenes from the film where you can see her, with the belly up and everything, it's literally all in her lower abdomen.
Well, no, I'm saying if she was saying that she drank enough beer to get her stomach looking like that, it would be more evenly dispersed.
Right.
Is what I'm saying.
Like, she's got some weight here, but I don't think enough, right? You know what I mean?
Right. That's what I'm saying, is it looks disproportionate. Like, why is it all congregated in the stomach?
and I know you weren't born until '94, like you said, and you also aren't a man. But she was prominently displayed in the mid to late '90s in a film called Reindeer Games, topless. Very memorable moment for any teenage male in the '90s, like myself. However, I would argue some of that might even be CGI because you can look at her films later, like where did this lady's breasts go?
Yeah.
And you think, well, they're not doing that. Well, in the 1995 film, I think it was Barbed Wire. This was a big news event. I remember in the '90s as well. Pamela Anderson would not pose nude in the film for this movie Barbed Wire, despite her already posing for Playboy, and there was a big controversy surrounding these details, right? So the idea of transferring someone's face onto someone else's body is not absurd in Hollywood at that time, especially since in 1988 when they did Back to the Future 2, Crispin Glover, like we were just talking about last week, Back to the Future film review, Crispin Glover, he was not in number 2 because they superimposed some stuff and played some trickeries. So,
they can literally fake anything. I mean, they faked the moon landing for Christ's sake, and people are still believing that.
You ain't kidding. People still believe that, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's super easy to fake stuff like that.
For sure. So I think we've laid some good groundwork here as far as some of the backstory and characters involved with some of these activities, and maybe even some substantiate some claims as to why these things may be going on. I would assert these folks have been associated with some hood rat activities for a long time. And again, when you imply that maybe Sydney Simpson and Khloe Kardashian have the same dad, I think it's, they look a lot alike. They look more like sisters than she does with the rest of the Kardashians, if you ask me. But
she looks nothing like the other Kardashians to an annoying degree. Like it's right. Almost like, are you seriously trying to say that this one is with the rest of them? Like one of these is not like the other. Like it's
that's
Chloe.
For sure. I mean, size wise, looks wise, and again, when they're vacationing with the Simpsons, and they're doing, weird sexual swinger kind of activities, I think that's certainly plausible, right? That
dude, that's what they were doing at the Tate house too. Just to bring that up, I mean, they were infamous wife swapping and
right
making videos of the shit and like
exactly
swapping Sharon around. I mean, who even knows whose baby she was pregnant with at the time? Maybe that's what got her killed if she was actually killed. But I mean, it makes
I'm of the same
wonder.
opinion too. You can't know who that daddy is, right?
No, man, they was doing all kinds of wife swapping and nasty stuff, and I'm sure that the Kardashians were doing that shit too. That's why he was so gung ho to represent OJ. I don't know.
Right. Before we get any further here, let me just fix something here. Before we get any further into the evidence here, when we're discussing some of what the salient characteristics that have convinced you that this was indeed the work of Orenthal James Simpson, I just want to go over some of the cast of characters, a little bit further detail, if you will. We'll go into the witness. We'll go into the state's evidence and the witnesses as well. But the cast of characters, I think, is very interesting. So when you're describing how we're sold these things, and like I was saying before, this kind of more or less whole hog effect, if you will, right? Give me one second. I just got to fix something here real fast.
Okay.
Good to go. So, I was saying, like, we're sold this new media campaign of where everyone's going to see the whole court trial. We don't see court trials, and I think this is part of the magic show, if you will, convincing folks that we have this open public court system that's fair and objective, and we do so by events like this, where we're like, oh well, we televise the whole.
Oh shit!
Am I back?
You're back.
And the Idaho formers, and that's almost all censored and sealed, right? So, but and the people who sold us the OJ Simpson case is interesting to me. So we first see Charles Grodin, right? He's now one of these media news pundits who's going to start bringing us updates on the OJ Simpson case every day. Granted, he was an actor already. I'm saying we meet him in this new capacity, right? Are you familiar with Charles Grodin?
Not really.
So Charles Grodin is this fella.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen him before. Gotcha.
Charles Grodin and a panel of yelling weirdos discussed the OJ Simpson case. That's precisely what I'm talking about. He was a nut job when he came out about these things. Charles Grodin got his start in Hollywood thanks to Cocaine Bob Evans in the film Rosemary's Baby.
No, stop it. Shut your mouth.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
He plays that doctor in there. There he is right there.
Yeah, he does.
You can see him right here in the image from the film.
Does. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
he was the dad in Beethoven. He played with De Niro in Midnight Run. De Niro's career also made in part or in fully thanks to Bob Cocaine Evans. So you see a lot of these people sticking together over the years. But yeah, Grodin, that's where he got his start, right? And again, we see him in the media. Then we also meet Greta Van Susteren, later Fox News pundit, at this time CNN, Scientologist at the time, too, by the way. So when you're describing these things as maybe Nicole Brown Simpson might be Megyn Kelly, I was like, wait a second. That's interesting because we're sold these new media packages and pundits as a result of this case, right? And they all have some strange connections, right? All back to this, process being the dark wing of Scientology, as I assert. And, and you have all these Scientologists as well. And then, we also get Charles Manson's friend, Ira Reiner, the former district attorney from Los Angeles from 84 to 92. He prosecuted some interesting cases during that time. But we get him as a media pundit as well in this case. So, when you're saying these things, and Megyn Kelly, I don't know this for a fact. I've never witnessed it, but I did. I have one of my old Air Force dudes got out of the Air Force, went to college, and TV broadcasting or whatever, and got a job at Fox News, and kind of worked his way up in production there, right? And I used to go hang out there a lot of times in the city because it was very much a party atmosphere, right? It's a lot of drinking going on back in my drinking days, and so I got to know the production staff. I played on their fantasy baseball team a couple years, won back-to-back years and stuff. So I never worked there, but I think some people thought I might have. But anyway, I heard stories there. I heard she had quite a cocaine habit, for example. And it'd be interesting because
really?
Nicole Brown Simpson had quite a cocaine habit. So
yeah, she did.
That's very interesting. You mentioned that. I never heard that before. So, but it kind of plays what I'm saying is we're sold these new media characters, right? Greta Van Susteren again, right? Today she's like, oh, I regret my time spent covering the OJ trial. Well, good for you, lady, because again, it was kind of a nut jobbery, if you ask me, right? And on that same note, we get Marcia Clark. She's also providing commentary today on the Idaho case, right? Strangely enough. And she was the prosecutor, LA County prosecutor, prosecuting this case, lead prosecutor, right? She was a Scientologist at the time. She was married to
shut up. She was?
It gets worse. I can't make this shit up, ma'am. So this is an article she wrote herself in 1997, I believe, and I'll put these links in the show notes here. But her husband at the time, this fellow by the name of Gordon Clark, he was an OT7 executive staff member of Scientology. So he was a billion-year contract guy, right? So the guy that married them was the Scientologist named Bruce Roman. She writes about this in her article. And Bruce Roman just happened to be friends with her first husband as well, who was also a Scientologist, this Gabby Horowitz guy, right? And Bruce Roman marries Marcia Clark and her new husband, and then, shortly thereafter somehow murders Gabby Horowitz, her first husband, her ex-husband.
What?
And doesn't get charged courtesy of Ira Reiner, Charles Manson.
No, stop it.
Yeah, I can't make this shit up.
Small fucking circles.
So you see there's a lot of connections back to these Manson situations from the OJ case and then forward on to the Idaho case, because why do they select this lady or felon Nazi Fuhrman to provide commentary? And again, this is Ira Reiner. He was the DA from 84 to 92, and then he was one of the live pundits we get after that, right, on TV. And they were 94. He prosecutes the Hillside Stranglers. That was before him. He prosecutes Richard Ramirez. He prosecutes the Cotton Club murders of Bob Cocaine Evans that he let walk, right?
The Cotton Club murders and Richard Ramirez are both programmed to kill.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And the McMartin preschool, that he did that case too.
Wait! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! You're kidding me. This
despite
guy
despite being an
McMartin.
Yep. Despite being he did the whitewashing of right as the district attorney. So despite calling Bob Evans as the number one witness in the case of the murder of against Roy Radin, number one person, in the grand jury, right? They were questioning. He pleads the fifth. The judge yells at him. Ira Reiner never charges him. He's an unindicted co-conspirator in that murder. So, he lets Cocaine Bob walk there. He covers the McMartin stuff. We don't know much about the Richard Ramirez shit. There's a lot to be said there.
So he has his hand in all of the program to kill shit.
Big time.
McMartin preschool, Richard Ramirez, Cotton Club murders. He's just letting everybody walk. Motherfucker. Manson. What?
So
this guy, please tell me he's dead.
During the trials, they say they're looking for an attorney for Leslie Van Houten, and Charles Manson says, I have a friend who will represent her. And they called each other personal friends, and he was for a period of time Leslie Van Houten's attorney.
He said, I have a friend.
Yep.
Oh, please tell me this man died horribly.
I think he's still alive.
Is he still alive? Oh, yeah. God. Oh, my God. Do you know the McMartin preschool trial has been one of the most frustrating things to research that I've ever looked into? I mean, just the amount of cover-ups and the amount of in this guy. Oh my God, JJ.
Right? Do you see how I say a lot of these things that are all interweaving and connecting here in these matters?
Yeah.
So this is a New York Times article from March of 1970. State gets new star witness in Tate murder case, right? And then we go down here. First, Miss Van Houten dismissed her court-appointed lawyer and selected Ira Reiner, a friend of Manson's. There you go.
A friend of Manson's.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
How is he connected to the OJ case?
He was so he was one of the media stars we got selling us the case right on TV all the time, right?
Right. Okay, that's what I thought, but
he just left office as of district attorney there. I think
he wasn't like the presiding district attorney, but he was like the mouthpiece, right?
Well, no, he lost the election in 92. From 84 to 92, he was the DA there in LA County. In 94, suddenly he gets hired as a media pundit to describe this case to
media.
to
right,
America.
right. That's what I meant. Okay.
We also meet Phil McGraw, not a doctor any longer, Phil, because he lost that license. We meet him for the very first time, providing commentary on the OJ case. Now,
Dr. Phil.
Yes, ma'am. And I've long suspected old doctor, not a Dr. Phil, because he lost his license a long time ago. I believe is how the story goes. He lost it before even the OJ case. I think it was 91 or 92 that he lost it, or got suspended. I think initially suspended. I don't know if it was fully revoked.
Dr. Phil. What? How the fuck does he get wrapped up in this?
Well, I would assert, ma'am, that there's a good high probability that Dr. Phil is a Scientologist or was a Scientologist. So we meet Dr. Phil, courtesy of Oprah Winfrey. And then in 1990, and then immediately following that on a national stage over the OJ Simpson case, providing commentary. In 1990, McGraw co-founded Courtroom Sciences Incorporated, a trial consulting firm with lawyer Gary Dobbs. They would do dry runs of court cases in simulated courtrooms, and McGraw would offer advice about what part of the lawyer's case worked and what parts did not. McGraw is no longer an officer or director of the company. The TV show Bull is based on McGraw's experiences as the trial consultant. McGraw began working with Oprah Winfrey through CSI. So I believe that was 90. Oh, that was 95. Okay. So we actually do first meet him in the OJ Simpson trial then, doing these kind of trial consulting commentary on TV, right? But prior to that, him and his father started this self-help seminar group out of Texas called Choices, which has a lot the hallmarks of what I would describe would be a similar thing to executive success programs of the NXIVM cult.
Really?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
so this
Dr. Phil.
Right. So,
What a
Thelma Box was the
bastard.
creator and founder of Choices Seminars in '83. She was a successful Texas businesswoman who started Choices along with Dr. Phil and his father, Joe McGraw. So, when you're describing these
Wow.
people that were being sold, right, as a result of these trials, making, again, the whole hog effect of making money off of, everything regarding these high profile events, we see a lot of questionable characters that get introduced to us, and they all seem to have a lot of deep Scientology / process slash Manson roots / Cocaine Bob. So it's all kind of the same network, if you ask me. But Dr. Phil's no different, if you ask me as well.
So like the OJ thing kind of like busted him out onto the scene as well as part of the
Yes, ma'am.
sensationalism.
And strangely enough, when OJ Simpson gets busted for the kidnapping robbery charge in Vegas in the mid-aughts, the one person we see erupt on the national scene as the go-to person providing commentary news on that case is a lady by the name of Ashley Banfield. She now plays the front runner as the propaganda mouthpiece in the Idaho 4 murders on News Nation.
Wow.
Yeah.
So these are like it's I kind of have to go back to what I asked you before, and it makes me wonder if this shit isn't all staged and like Nicole never died.
Well, again, I like the idea, especially when you're talking about Megyn Kelly, but I would consider that. I would leave your mind open to it's not mutually exclusive. She can still die, and they can still use all of these things to the same effect.
So let's talk about the autopsy then, because I'm just curious what your thoughts are on all of that.
Sure. Well, I think we built a good, strong case there for motivations on these things regarding these chaotic, again, process church chaos, social turbulence, right? The process church grows out of the Tavistock's concepts of what they described and wrote down in a research paper called social turbulence in 1963. So, and it is this idea of creating these chaotic cultural events that are very polarizing, in which to social engineer and direct society in the manner in which you wish to do so. It makes society malleable, right? That's literally what they wrote. And the guy who wrote the paper founded Tavistock and then invaded America the same time the Process Church did in '68, except for Alan Trist. He goes to UCLA and works with Jolyon West at the psychology department briefly before I think Jolyon West goes to Oklahoma or wherever he went after that. But they have a crossover there. Alan Trist's son, Eric Trist, was best friends with Grateful Dead lead singer Jerry Garcia and was the band's publishing house president. The Tavistock son ran the Grateful Dead's publishing house, and he just died a few years ago.
Wow. I did all that research on Laurel Canyon, and I never got into. I'm aware of Tavistock, but not like all the details, like as far as that goes. But
sure,
I know, the Beatles and stuff are Tavistock, and they've had their,
and they're also a process.
Well, I didn't know that shit, but I know that they've had their impact on culture forever long. But so
that's a good
wild
point, and they still do, if you ask me. So there's a fellow by the name of Peter Asher, major figure in music production and publishing and whatnot. He owned a coffee shop in the Mayfair district circa 1964. The Sativa Cafe, Indica Cafe. I got my pot strains mixed up. Indica Cafe. He was a member of the process. His sister.
So they're all process or Scientology.
Yeah, well, any process is an offshoot, and I would allege still a dark wing of Scientology. But so Peter Asher, this is the Indica Cafe, is the process headquarters in the Mayfair district, right? And his sister's dating Paul McCartney, right? And John Lennon meets Yoko Ono at that cafe, and Peter and Jane Asher's first cousin is one of the founding members of the process. She's alive and well today in Kanab, Utah. I think she may have just passed a couple years ago. She was alive and well until recently. So Peter Asher is a major figure to this day. He's wrapped up in the Diddy stuff.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So this is the guy that owned that and he's been very prominent in Los Angeles, not just the UK.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. In 2019, Asher published a book, The Beatles from A to Z, about his personal reminiscences about the band. Yep. this was his sister who dated Paul, the original Paul, not Fall, who dated Paul McCartney.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah. But yeah, their cousin
Let me
had been
see
alive
your
and well.
let me see your face.
Jane Asher, hold on, stand by, please.
I guess for an old lady, she's not bad.
Yeah,
Bet
so
she
the
looked
Beatles,
better back in the day.
the Beatles were definitely processing, like I said, how they all met and hung out there and whatnot, and then they did they did felt they introduced Selima throughout their music, not just the Crowley stuff and Sgt. Pepper's. They in fact, I think it's their album Help. They're doing the arm signals and hand signals. Nick points out how that's directly out of Crowley. That's directly out of Thelema. The hand and arm signals they're doing, and they're wearing the early kind of process style cloaks. I'll bring a picture.
Well, while you're at it, why don't you bring up a picture of the Beatles? This was something that one of my fellow conspiracy podcasters pointed this out to me. It's the Beatles with a bunch of baby parts and like covered in blood.
Yeah, it's creepy, huh?
Yeah, dude, I had never seen that before in my life. So these are the signals
can you give
right
me one,
here.
Yeah, can you give me one moment? Yeah, and they're wearing some very processing style cloaks. Can you give me one moment? My dog sounds like he wants to eat somebody. I'll be right back, Julie. I apologize.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, if you don't mind, please sing us a song there for the folks of the interwebs.
Oh,
I'm obviously
no.
joking.
Thank you so
much.
much.
Do you know any good songs from the album Help?
It's definitely not my favorite album. I think I'm more of a Revolver type of gal. Let me see. I'm going to read some of these comments here. Oh, somebody said the Beatles are gay. I mean, they might be. Yoko definitely looks like a man to me.
Thanks for holding it down there, Julia.
Do you think Yoko's a man?
I think Yoko's some sort of sex pot type situation. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of back and forth spook activities going on with these folks. You know what I mean? This whole process scene again, getting around all the cocaine trafficking, Iran Contra kind of activities. But there's a lot to be said about the Beatles and what they were used for and whatnot. But I think a lot of it was to transform this cultural engineering, like I was saying, and these polemic style principles of Aleister Crowley, because that's seemingly what has occurred. And part of that is to keep that network going, and keeping that network going is selling drugs, sex, and rock and roll, right? So you got to promote these things, you got to cover up the crimes associated with these things, right?
Yeah, and also if John really get it how they say he got it, and she walked without a single ricochet, missed bullet, like she was right next to him, right? Like, and she didn't get,
right.
You know what I'm saying?
That happens at the Dakota building. And again, Mark David Chapman had interactions with Scientology in Hawaii before he flew there. And it happens at the Dakota building.
What's his name?
Well, the Dakota building.
Kenneth Anger. He had connections to Kenneth Anger.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, he did.
Bobby Beausoleil's boyfriend, huh?
Yes.
So, the Dakota building was the site of Rosemary's Baby, back to Bob Cocaine Evans and Roman Polanski. And again, it's Bob Cocaine Evans that brokers the marriage between Polanski and Tate. So
I mean, it's all so interconnected. And I don't know if you were on this episode, but one of my favorite things, because I know you're about to bring this up, when I covered Marilyn Monroe and I went over her autopsy report and all the inconsistencies in there and how there's no way she could have killed herself, I'm interested to see what the autopsy will tell us about these two, because up until this point, I was convinced on OJ's guilt solely based on the fact that she was practically decapitated and Ron wasn't. and that it looked like there was, a rush job done to quickly eliminate Ron, so whoever it was could take their sweet ass time slicing and dicing Mr. Brown Simpson.
Well, I hear you, man. But I would argue you have that in reverse. That it was Nicole was caught by surprise. Her neck was deeply cut, but it was done from behind, and she was caught by surprise. You can tell that because her feet get caught underneath the fence, and she doesn't move. And that's an important factor because Ron Goldman's later found with her blood underneath on the soles of his shoes, which, according to the state's circumstances of events, timeline of events, that never transpires. Ron's killed feet away and never goes near Nicole's body. So again,
that's what I was led to believe.
Yeah. Well, the evidence would support otherwise. And again,
good. I want to hear about it.
We'll cruise through those. If you're good with another 60 minutes here, I know we're already an hour and a half. We'll cruise through the rest of the detectives and then the evidence here. So we have Tom Lang, lead detective, right? He shows up, a very late response. We see that also with the Idaho 4 case. 911's called at noon. The lead detective doesn't show up for 4 hours. Same thing here, 4 hours. So whatever reasons these lead detectives need to take 4 hours to show up to a murder scene, a heinous murder scene, I have no idea, especially in a small town like Moscow, Idaho. But Tom Lang, you're familiar with the 4 on the floor murders of Laurel Canyon?
The foe on the flow, one of my favorite Laurel Canyon debaucheries.
Lead detective Tom Lang.
Wow. So this guy's a puppet as well.
Absolutely. Him and Van Natter both. You know, Lang would later defend Eddie Nash. Eddie Nash skirts charges on ordering that hit with John Holmes on the 4 on the floor murders for 20 years. Governor Moonbeam Jerry Brown, former governor of California, I believe thrice, as was his father. Old Moonbeam was, according to the files of Ed Sanders, was a member of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. He lived 3 doors down on Wonderland Avenue.
Yes, I did know that. Yeah. I did know that he lived 4 doors down from the foe on the flow, but I didn't know he was involved in the process.
Down. I was thinking of the band. Yeah, he's long time dated Linda Ronstadt. She was involved in that mix too. Yeah.
Oh, Ronstadt?
Yeah.
Oh, JJ, no. I love her. Are you telling me she's a piece of dog shit too?
Yeah, in all probable likelihood, yes, ma'am.
Oh, JJ.
So Tom Lang runs cover, like you see, Bigfoot Bjornson and Inherent Vice do, right, in the film. Josh Brolin's character. He's running cover for all sorts of stuff. So these guys are all bagmen in that regard. Now, Tom Lang would later defend Eddie Nash, the man who would order and ultimately get charged 20 years later for ordering that hit. So interesting character.
On the
Tom
flow. Lang. That is one of LA's most bloody and brutal crime scenes. That was a Laurel Canyon era crime scene there. It's definitely, I don't know, man.
John Holmes, the porn star, would get busted for this, right? Eaton Holmes at one point called Eddie Nash, that nightclub owner, the man who ordered this drug trafficker, the most evil man I've ever known. And that's the guy that Tom Lang, the lead detective here in both that murder and the OJ murder, would claim is not a bad guy. That man ran a teenage no alcohol all night nightclub in Hollywood named the Odyssey. A lot of strange and weird shit went down there. A lot of strange and weird shit.
What the fuck? He died of AIDS in 1888. Thank God. Wait.
Well, that was Holmes. That was Holmes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Shit.
They didn't prosecute Nash until 2001.
My God.
Yeah. So Nash's co-lead detective on the OJ case, Philip Van Natter. Sadly, a fellow West Virginian. I don't like to claim that, but he again is part of that character. I say Bigfoot Bjornson's based off of there. He's a rookie cop at the Tate Polanski home. He arrests Polanski in 1977 for the rape of a 13-year-old. That's Van Natter.
That's Van Natter. Is he processed?
If he's not, he's doing the bidding of same, right? Again, like Bjornsson is, he's doing the bidding of this larger network, right? He doesn't really know who they are. And spoiler alert, he doesn't like their activities. That's why he gets he starts weaponizing Joaquin Phoenix against this network, right? This criminal network, because they murdered his partner, right? So he's not a man of ethics or morals. He's a man of revenge for murdering his partner, right? So, but again, he's a bagman for this network. That's Philip Van Adder. It's a great example of his activities.
So do you think he's a bad guy?
I think he's the worst.
He's the worst.
I think I could demonstrate how he supervised an officer. He leaves. So Lang, Van Adder, and Fuhrman are all gone immediately following the trial. Van Adder comes to Cincinnati. He would supervise an officer who later, in recent years, we get busted for memory holing 8 years of child sexual abuse criminal complaints. Would be one of the that's his mentor right there. The guy who did that. They worked together here in Rising Sun, Indiana.
So he's just a piece of dog shit.
He's a bagman. He's a national bagman. If you think this network is a national network, Julie, it makes a lot more sense. If you need a bagman in around Cincinnati or whatnot, or certain regions, and you got to move them around, right? And you may lose the guy in LA, but you can use them out like the Mafia. You can use them out in Indiana or Ohio. It's the same difference, right?
So, just for people who are joining the conversation right now, we're talking about the comparison between a movie called Inherent Vice with a character named Bjornsson to this guy in real life, like how the character was probably based off of this guy, because somebody said who's Bjornsson or something like that in the comments. But
I'm glad you're keeping up with the comments. Thank you, Julia.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say, like, Bjornsson is a fictional character in a movie that is based off of these shitheads in real life.
Yep. That's correct, ma'am. So then we get Mark Fuhrman. He's Lang and Van Adder are the lead detectives. Fuhrman's the first detective on scene. So they get there at 4:00. Fuhrman gets there at approximately 2:10. The murders occur between 10:32 and 10:42 on the 12th. However, 911 is not called until 12:09 a.m. and the initial response is at 12:17 a.m. on the 13th. And that's for a robbery. That's for a suspected robbery. So all these people hear screams and whatnot at 10:30, 10:42 allegedly, again, according to the case later, but no one calls 911 for another almost hour and a half.
Well, what's this stuff about the dog barking and somebody being like having to take in the dog and doing all that?
So when the police respond, so the dog allegedly chased the assailants, away from the scene, right, and chased their car, according to other reports, right? Some of these reports that would later be thrown out by the prosecution later because it didn't fit their timeline, but one of which said they saw a white Bronco again. They thought it was OJ driving on the opposite direction of OJ's house 5 minutes after OJ was seen on his property by a limo driver. So that didn't work out for the prosecution too well. So while that event most likely did happen because the dog then allegedly chased that car and was found by a neighbor who brought it back to the house at 12:17 when the cops respond, she's waiting for the cops there at the house. So what pretense she was operating under, I have no idea, because there's this weird gap of time where the state says no one called 911.
Gap of time.
I suspect they're lying, right, about this weird. I suspect there's a lot of 911 calls that they're not public about, right? And who's going to tell us about it? The police? Well, they're the ones hiding it. And I think that's the same case in the Idaho 4 case. I think there was more emergency calls, not necessarily from the home, but of folks who may have heard something or whatever. And the police are not going to tell us about these things because they're the ones hiding all their shit. So, and speaking of hiding shit, we got Mark Fuhrman. So that's the other guy. And again, he's the Nazi felon dude. So he gets questioned in the trial whether or not he planted evidence. Now, he said he pleads the fifth. He gets charged for a felony for perjury over these matters. And again, a 42-page report from the Internal Affairs at LAPD gets published in October of 95. During the trial, after he testifies, though, and again, the prosecution knew this was happening, and they let him testify anyway. So he was used, in my opinion, to blow up the case from both sides and create more chaos, right? He was used in planting evidence, but during the trial, he was used to ruin the case for everybody. No one could argue anything after
his little shitty pipsqueak face.
Yeah.
Like he's got like some kind of shitty eating grin on right now. You can tell he's just full of it.
And Oh, for sure. And I was surprised. I guess I've never seen it, but there's a lot of Scientologists in it. The Netflix documentary, right? On or maybe this was American Crime Story. One of these recent, The Truth Behind the People versus OJ Simpson. One of these recent productions includes the Nazi memorabilia or Nazi pens that Fuhrman was wearing. So, and again, Fuhrman, this is his 1996 plea agreement for perjury in that case. So I think it's interesting.
What the fuck?
Yeah, he's a felon. I don't know how he's a PI.
Felon.
He calls himself a private detective on TV. I don't know any state you can be a private detective, with the exception of Mississippi. That's a different story altogether. As a felon,
not with a felony.
In Mississippi, sadly, you can.
Oh, and just in Mississippi, you can.
Well, that's the only one I'm aware of. Yeah, certainly not in Ohio, where I was licensed.
I was gonna say nowhere I've ever lived. You can't. Not if you have a felony.
You couldn't do it with a misdemeanor here. I mean, I owned a PI. I was licensed and owned a PI company for 4.5 years, and after I retired from the Air Force, and you can't. Yeah, you're not getting away with that here. But nonetheless, there's felon Nazi Mark Fuhrman. Right, these aren't things that I claim. He signed a plea agreement for that felony, etc. He's many people documented the Nazi stuff through that internal affairs report, commented on by Johnny Cochran in his book, featured in recent documentaries apparently. So the interesting thing is, we'll get into this evidence here that he planted. Like I said, the police always had a shifting timeline at the beginning of this case, right? So the cops make mistakes in OJ warrants. This is an article from March of 95 describing how during the trial now they're shifting everything from the probable cause affidavit of arrest and changing all these narratives and details, right? That's happening in the Idaho case too. That's exactly the same playbook in the Idaho murder. So, and one of the interesting things with Fuhrman is they try to hide his relationship with the case at all. So the defense didn't know about him for I think 2 weeks that he was even on scene. So it was always a cover up from day one with Fuhrman, right? They try to cover everything up with him, even though he wrote reports. He wrote a report at 6 o'clock that morning claiming that there was blood inside the Bronco. Well, how the hell would old Nazi felon Fuhrman know that unless he planted it, right?
Ooh. So okay, let me ask you something then.
Yep.
Why the high-speed chase if he didn't do it?
Okay, so that's a good question. Before we get into the evidence, let's go back to the arrest, right? So June 12th, this is the timeline of events as identified by the prosecution. On June 12th, at approximately 2200 hours, 10:32 to 10:42 p.m., was the murders that took place here at the Bundy residence of Nicole Brown Simpson, where Ron Goldman had stopped by with her mother's eyeglasses that she apparently left at the Italian restaurant that night, and he was bringing that over there for her. Right, that's how the story goes. And again, they recovered this envelope and eyeglasses, and that becomes evidence we'll discuss here. But it's important to note that these timelines again, that's their timeline again. They shifted these things, etc. But OJ's seen at his Rockingham estate at 10:45, and someone jumped over that wall or made a bump on the wall behind the guest house of Cato Kalin at 10:42. These are known statements. Or, I'm sorry, 10:42 that happens, and at 10:50 the limo driver sees him. So there's only we know that's something's going on over there at those hours, right? And again, it's a 6-minute drive between locations. So the state claims that he went that. At 10:03 that night, he calls his ex-girlfriend, Paula Barbieri, right? Paula Barbieri just happens to be dating Bob Cocaine Evans at this very time. Although she's allegedly in Vegas. Yes, ma'am. Although she's allegedly in Vegas visiting Michael Bolton during this phone call. So we know that happens at 10:03. We know that we know that the limo driver gets to OJ's house and pulls in front of his gate at 10:21. The white Bronco is parked on the side road next to the property later, right? So, but the limo driver pulls onto Rockingham, pulls in front of the gate, 10:21, because he calls his boss and lets him know. We know these things, right? So 10:21, right? OJ's not leaving there after that. So he would have had him been gone before that, right? You know what I mean? Otherwise, the limo driver would have seen him, despite him, he would have to sneak out of there or whatever else. But again,
yeah, I got you.
He would have had to come back before 10 1050 or 1042 or 1050, where those two sightings occurred or events occurred on his property. And in doing that, you know what I mean? Again, it's building a timeline where it's just not possible. You know what I mean? So, for example, the state's timeline is he murdered these folks between 1032 and 1042. Well, then how's he jumping over his wall 1042 to be seen by the limo driver, you know, at like 1045, 1050, right? So I'm saying, so these timelines don't make sense. And again, they have witnesses even at the event that don't seem to comport and that they would later discard later, right? So we know that the murders occurred somewhere around those times. We also seemingly indicate that OJ Simpson this timeline never really got too focused on because of the Fuhrman factor, right? Fuhrman, again, blew up the case for everybody where no one would know left from right or up from down, right? And I think that's where a lot of the American public sits today because they're so confused on these details when the science and the forensics behind all of these things were pretty cut and dry. You know, but so Fuhrman blew it all up with all of his Nazi stuff, and the defense played in on it too, and so did the prosecution, because they didn't report the actual Nazi stuff from the internal affairs report. They brought in some filmmaker from 10 years prior that had recorded conversations with Mark Fuhrman. So, you know, very strange stuff there, right? Very strange stuff.
Yes.
With those things. So, Fuhrman gets a call. So we were talking about the neighbor and the dog, right? With this timeline, right? So OJ gets in the limo at 10:50 off to the airport for a pre-planned golf event in Chicago, right? Because it's important, because Van Natter would claim that there was no pre-planned event and he fled Los Angeles via red-eye flight. That's what he wrote in the probable cause statement. It was an obvious lie. It's a pre-planned golf outing with the Hertz rental car company and their executives, right? You know, which is kind of funny. They would never look for a weapon in Los Angeles for the case. They did, however.
They would never.
No, they never searched for a weapon there. There was no search for a weapon. They searched the only search for a weapon occurred at the O'Hare Airport, around the Hilton O'Hare Airport, where OJ stayed that night after he got into Chicago, or stayed that morning. They searched the surrounding areas and woods up there for a knife, meaning he would have had to fly with it up there, first of all, right? But you know, they never. The bloody clothes they found in his room months later, right? And it just appeared like 2 months after the fact. You know, like, oh, we found this bloody sock. It was in his bedroom. That's the stuff that turned out to have EDTA in it, that preservative, right? From blood taken from OJ. So that's an important note. So when we go back to this whole Mark Fuhrman perjured himself by pleading the fifth about this question of planting evidence, which occurred outside the purview of the jury. The jury did not get to see that. So they were not privy to that information in the trial that he perjured himself over planting evidence in this act of pleading the fifth.
Well, I just found that out, let alone the jury.
Right. Well, isn't it? But I mean, that should be. I hear what you're saying, but you know what I mean. Like when you're telling the jury to leave over circumstances like that, like there's tomfoolery afoot, obviously, in my opinion.
For sure, for sure.
So they don't ask Van Natter that question. When I say the defense is just as complicit in these shenanigans as the prosecution, they don't ask Van Natter if he planted evidence. And Van Natter actually walked around the crime scene with not only a blood vial of Simpson's, but a blood vial of the two victims from June 13th and through June 16th.
No.
Yeah. And that blood vial was returned. Those blood vials were checked back into evidence, missing some blood.
What?
Yep.
Why am I just hearing about this?
Well, once again, even the jury didn't get to hear about this until after the case. So this was developed during the case, and the top criminologist from the crime lab there in LA County, he testifies it ends up being part of the civil case the following year, even though he loses that one for some strange reason. But yeah, I'm trying to bring this up here with the criminologist. Yeah. So June 13th, he flies back from Chicago, right? He gets the call in Chicago, says he drops the glass, cuts his finger, right? Flies back. He voluntarily gives blood to Van Natter. Van Natter's walking around with his blood, goes to the court. They find out later goes to the coroner's office, gets blood from the two victims, vials of blood. Doesn't check any of that in for 3 days. None of the evidence in this case gets checked in until after he checks in that blood. 3 days later.
Oh, convenient.
That probable cause statement claims that on June 17th, the probable cause warrant for arrest was issued with a probable cause affidavit written by Van Natter. again, like I said, it kept changing, just like the Idaho 4 case. That probable cause just keeps changing. So this one also changes in respect that he claims that they have DNA test results proving that was Simpson's DNA on the scene. This is 3 days after the murder, in less than 12 hours after he admitted the stuff into evidence.
Wow.
No one knows that at the time. They don't know that until later, right? So like I said, the probable cause statement proved to be bunk.
What the fuck?
Yeah, that's some wild shit, right?
Nobody talks about this.
Mm-hmm. That's correct, ma'am. You are correct.
So wait. When does the high-speed chase come in?
So June 12th is the murder. June 13th, he flies back, gives the blood. June 16th, the evidence is admitted. June 17th, the warrant's issued. He's staying with Robert Kardashian this entire time, his best friend, who's an attorney. So it's Kardashian, I think, that is the only one who had any interest out for Simpson during all of this, right? He's staying over there. Apparently, Paula Barbieri's over there as well, his ex-girlfriend who was then dating Cocaine Bob. So that's a strange conundrum, because the first attorney that Kardashian hires on the quote unquote dream team, I would call the nightmare defense team of OJ Simpson, because he may have gotten acquitted on the charges, but he still lived the rest of his life as a murderer in the public eyes of America, which is kind of the same thing. So the first guy he hires, Robert Shapiro, right? Robert Shapiro allegedly compiles the rest of the team. That's who Kardashian tells Simpson to hire. Robert Shapiro just happens to be the attorney for Bob Cocaine Evans back in the 1988 hearing for the murder of Roy Radin, who told Evans to plead the fifth.
Oh my God.
Shapiro then hires Dershowitz, Epstein's buddy. Then hires F. Lee Bailey. F. Lee Bailey had just skirted charges in Iran-Contra the year prior because he was the head of a bank in Florida that was a major epicenter of activity in the BCCI scandal and the Drexel Burnham Lambert scandal of the junk bond scandal. So they were the number one owner of the junk bonds at this bank that F. Lee Bailey just happened to be the director of, that just happened to be the CIA drug running bank, right?
Oh, come on.
And F. Lee Bailey said, I'm out of here, guys. And then next thing he does is represent OJ. So,
oh my God.
That junk bond scandal, that they were the number ones. So BCCI owned this bank in Miami that F. Lee Bailey was director of, along with the state's attorney for the District of Miami down there. They were the co-directors. When the dominoes fell in Iran-Contra there around circa 93, that's what happened. They were the directors. Bunch of drug money through BCCI. That bank also owned the largest amount of like $1.5 billion in junk bonds from this firm Drexel Burnham Lambert by a fellow by the name of Michael Milliken and his underling Leon Black. Leon Black has paid out over $200 million to Epstein victims to avoid charges. He's under numerous investigations, including by Congress, and entered into a deal against all rules, regulations, and laws of the state of Idaho with the University of Idaho to finance their procurement of the University of Phoenix.
JJ,
back to Idaho Contra.
Stop it.
So that's the nightmare team of OJ Simpson, right? So they don't question.
God.
So if you're going to ask Fuhrman if he plants evidence, why are you not asking this guy who walked around the scene with blood, right?
With the vial
vials,
of
right?
blood, literally.
Not just OJ's, but also the victims, right? And they pretended like it was normal stuff. It was normal stuff. I'm just trying to. I have an article where that crime lab technician testifies. And again, I can't find it at the moment. But yeah, it happens after the fact. So again, this was shielded from the criminal trial, but then later included in the civil trial. So they were like, "Oh yeah, we didn't tell you guys we had all that blood," because that'd be an important detail to know, right?
We didn't tell you guys we had all this blood. Like, what is going on here?
So as the story goes, right, they planted the blood in the vehicle much later, right? A lot of some of the drops of blood gets planted in the vehicle much later. I have two clips to demonstrate these things from the trial, right? From the trial. So The things that, again, didn't get highlighted because, again, Fuhrman blew the entire thing up for everybody. And, again, both sides played along. Both sides played along with the Fuhrman charade. So they have testimony and eyewitnesses, et cetera, saying the blood was clearly not there for 2 weeks even after the fact in many spots. So the only spot that seems to have blood on in the car was the rug, initially. So it seems Fuhrman. So back to the timeline. So Fuhrman gets there first at 2:10, 2:17 or something like that, 2:10 in the morning. Murders happened 4 hours prior, essentially. The lead detectives don't show up until 4. Fuhrman leaves the scene. This actually gets motioned out of the hearing by the prosecution because I think it was Shapiro that wrote about it in his book. So Fuhrman leaves the scene at 2:30 when his partner shows up. He's decided OJ Simpson's done this. They go to OJ Simpson's property, right, at 2:30. They call in at 2:53 from there. There's a record of it in police dispatch and in the records it got motioned out of the court for evidence. They call in at 2:53. He's a lead detective. He just left the scene of a crime, unsecured. I mean, there was other officers there, but he's the lead investigator. He's supposed to stay there. They apparently then go back to the scene. That's when the lead detectives get called at 3 a.m., Van Adder and Lang. They show up at 4. And from 4 to about 5:30, they all converse or so. They take a look at the scene, they converse. Then they all drive back over to the Rockingham estate of OJ Simpson. And instead of waiting for a search warrant, they decide they need to jump the fence and get in there immediately. This is when allegedly Fuhrman plants the glove. So the glove is covered in blood. He allegedly takes it and rubs it in the carpet of the Bronco, goes into the Bronco, rubs it in the carpet of the Bronco. This becomes interesting later because they can never explain the red fibers that are on the bloody glove. This became an issue, right? Those red fibers, in all likelihood, came from the carpet of the Bronco when Fuhrman rubbed it there. Then there's a stick and a bag that was used to plant the glove on the other side of the fence on the back side of the pool house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I got a video of that evidence. They're describing this here from the court trial here.
In one of the photographs, there's a stick that was.
What was that?
I was going to say, if it's long, I might take another bathroom break really quick, and I'll be right back.
Go ahead. Yeah, by all means.
Okay.
In one of the photographs, there's a stick that was somewhere around the location. We saw it briefly yesterday. I'm not sure it was marked. You remember seeing a stick somewhere out in and around Rockingham that morning?
Yes.
Where was this stick?
There was a piece of splintered wood, if that's what you're referring to, white in color, that was located on the parkway adjacent to the Bronco.
And was this stick ultimately booked into evidence?
Yes.
By whom, if you know?
I wasn't there when it was collected, I'm assuming Fung.
And I believe yesterday we showed some photographs that had some kind of a blue object on the other side of the fence. Do you remember seeing that blue object at all? On the other side of the fence, to the right of the fence at Rockingham?
I didn't recall seeing any blue object when I was there.
And did you see a photograph yesterday that had such a blue object?
I may have seen a photograph.
Does that refresh your recollection at all?
Perhaps if you showed it to me.
I'll mark this as defendant's next.
So, as the trial there, the trial of the century, the trial that lasted longer, beat out the Manson family trial for the longest in LA County history and most expensive. Another connection there. So that dude's even being a dick on the stand. He's like, well, if you show me a picture, and Cochran's obviously just explaining how they just showed the guy a picture and was presented as evidence. So this is a bag and a stick that was apparently used to plant that bloody glove across the fence. And it was an evidence bag. They just carelessly left it for whatever reason. So, but during this assault on the Simpson property between the hours of, I believe, 5:30 and 6 a.m. on the 13th, where this alleged planting of evidence goes. So I was just describing it as this assault at 5:30, this warrantless assault on hopping the fences and gates of Rockingham, the state of OJ Simpson, Orenthal James, that is, at 5:30, 6 in the morning, where this evidence has apparently been planting. So by everyone's admission, Fuhrman disappears behind the boathouse, or I'm sorry, the guest pool house for 15 minutes, right? The car is parked adjacent to the pool house. So again, he allegedly takes the glove and this evidence bag and the stick, wipes it on the carpet. Again, these carpet fibers are on there the state can never explain, and then, or never cares to try to explain, and then throws it over the fence. And then they all hop the fence, Lang, Van Adder, and Fuhrman. they're calling folks from his kitchen, Orenthal James Simpson's kitchen. They just make themselves at home, sit down and start making phone calls. They don't even have a warrant.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, based on that clip, it almost seems like this was like a sloppy, like they left the bag with the stick.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And then when it was presented to them, they're like, what bag and stick? And he's like, the one we just showed you, buddy. And they're like, you're going to have to show me that picture again.
Right. So the thing about if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Like there's something to that.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is again,
come on.
We were a lot of things were twisted, right? Like the Manson case, the helter skelter thing had some validity to it. It was twisted, right? Again, there was the forensic evidence in that case is equally as shifty as this case. And I was saying this case finally beat out that case for longest and most expensive and case in LA County history.
Somebody said they left the jacket too. What does that mean?
So we're to believe, much like the Koberger case in Idaho, we're to believe he's some genius moron who committed these crimes, right? Who perpetrated the nearly perfect event, except for doing all these super, super stupid things. Like, so OJ does all these things, but then leaves a hat and two gloves, one hat and a glove at the crime scene and the glove behind the pool house. And again, these things are silly. The one even at the scene, the glove they find at the scene is just placed on top of some leaves next to Goldman's body that doesn't seem to have any blood on the leaves.
You're killing me, JJ, because it's been like a point of humor in the trial to say like, oh, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. And it's like, honestly, because it was planted there with the stick.
Yeah. And again, a lot of these details were left out because they didn't include that Van Adder had all the one of the issues that came up was the length of time or the chain of custody. We have the same issues in Idaho. When presented with chain of custody in these recent open hearings, the states had none. They said, we did some DNA tests. We have no reports. We use this lab. They have no reports. We have no reports of finding it. They have no reports of admitting things into evidence. They have no, they have no visitors logs, it seems. At least the Orenthal James Simpson crime scene here, they had some visitors logs. You know what I mean? I'll give them that much. But yeah, we do see a lot of the same parallels there in, one of which is chain of custody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was an issue in the court that the evidence was not taken care of properly. There was no chain of custody. There was evidence left in vehicles unbagged for weeks. Right. They hosed down the crime scene 12 hours after the murders.
Why?
I'm about to show you pictures they didn't want to see what happened there. With the exception of the back gate, the back gate was the center of focus because they allegedly found some of OJ's blood, on the back gate because he went out that way, even though all reports say the assailants went out the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then again they have the bloody footprint near the back gate, even though there's no blood drops, even though they say that he came back in, to get the glove and the hat, but forgot, and that's where he left the footprint, even though they don't test the footprint that's on the envelope of the eyeglasses that Ron Goldman brought back from that Nicole Brown Simpson's mother left at Mezzaluna restaurant that night. There's a bloody footprint on that envelope, and they don't test that. They don't, there's no test there. So they do a lot of that here. They decide what is and is not, valid evidence. But the crime scene was definitely cleaned up pretty quickly. I'm bringing up some pictures here. So you see what I'm saying with kind of the staged nature of a lot of this evidence?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're killing me, Smalls. I had no idea about any of this.
Well, and statements from the jurors would even say that they were like, yeah, obviously, this stuff was planted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Man, the bag with the stick. That's gotta be like the most dead giveaway. The bag with the fucking stick. Are you kidding me?
Right. It's again, it is sloppy, right? But if they're, a lot of stuff in Idaho is sloppy. They wanted the suspect Koberger to plead. They probably wanted OJ to plea, right? Even though there was there's just life in prison in California. There's no death sentence there like it is in Idaho, but nonetheless, they were probably forcing a plea, right? So let's get into the forensics here. Goldman had defensive wins. This is an article from March of '95 during the trial. And lead investigator in the OJ Simpson double murder trial testified Tuesday that Ronald Goldman has apparently in a defensive struggle for his life, but did not appear to have hit his assailant. That's what Tom Lang wants everybody to believe. What do you think about that, Julie? Do you think he swung a bunch of phantom punches at somebody stabbing him 19 or 20 times?
Hell to the no.
Yeah, right. So there's one of his hands. And is clearly making contact with somebody. So it's not an accurate description of what Tom Lang. So we don't get these pictures for 20 years after Tom Lang makes that comment, right? Under oath in court.
20 years?
Yeah, I don't think these pictures weren't released for many years later. Yeah, I think 2016.
Wow.
But we can see that Ron Goldman clearly was in a defensive struggle, but clearly made contact with his aggressors.
Yeah, he did. Whoa.
But that's the story we get from Tom Lang at the trial, right? And then we look at some photos here of Mr. Orenthal James Simpson. This was taken on June 13th, right? This was actually, jurors saw this. They're like, didn't have any marks on his body. He has one cut, right? Do you see any marks on this man's body?
I do not.
Relative to those marks that Goldman was clearly making. You see why they had a claim and that he never made contact with his assailant, because had he made contact with his assailant, OJ would have some marks on him, right? But he's got none, right? So meanwhile, the actual evidence clearly shows, right, that he made contact with his assailant and fought a bloody battle nonetheless. And we can go over some of his autopsy report on some of those wounds. But let me bring up another picture of old Ron there. So when I say he got slashed and stabbed, I think it was 19 or 20 times there in the report, but kind of all over his body. So that's in his leg. So whoever's stabbing him I would assert, is a trained individual with a blade and knows exactly where to try to hit an artery in which to disable your victim.
What am I looking at here? His leg?
That's his left leg, kind of right in his pocket.
Okay.
area,
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I would assert someone who stabbed him is going, this at least was planning on going for the femoral artery at some point. But again, a lot of movement. And this is like a 3 foot by 3 foot zone, right? Where Goldman's fighting, I would argue, 2 attackers. You can see here in this picture, the bloody gloves kind of just sitting on top of things there at the crime scene, right? The hat and the bloody gloves.
Oh, so conveniently.
Yeah.
And they got some idiot in like a gown pointing at it. For me, that's one of the first giveaways that it's planted evidence.
Who was pointing at it? That was Fuhrman, because he's the first one who identified. He's the first investigator on scene. So everything's based on Fuhrman. He's the first investigator on scene. He's the first investigator on Rockingham because he's the first one to jump the fence, right? So again, he's over there at 253 calling. That gets excluded from the trial. So the entire thing's based upon all of it, the actions, assertions, and activities of Fuhrman, who they try to hide. The state tried to hide for weeks that Fuhrman was even associated with the case.
Well, there is an identical picture to that in the Marilyn Monroe case where they're pointing at the knocked over bottle of pills that she never took, by the way. You can go back and listen to my episode for more details on that. But they always point to like the planted shit, right? We got to get a good picture of this one, right? You know what I mean? That's what you're saying, right? Yeah.
So graphic photo, but there's the deceased body of Goldman. But you can see on his left leg where someone's going for artery to disable him because, again, he's allegedly a martial artist, so he's probably punching and kicking.
And you think he was fighting off 2 assailants?
Yeah, one from both sides, right? So you can see the small confined area they cornered him into. I think you had one on the left and one right here. So this picture is being taken from where Nicole's laying down. He never comes over to the steps area. I got a better diagram, but he never comes over here to get her blood on the bottom of his feet, according to their story. Yet the state crime lab found her blood on the bottom of his sneakers. So there's Fuhrman again pointing out. So that to the left right here is where Goldman's laying down. To the right is where Nicole Brown Simpson's laying down. He never made it here, right? I'm saying one assailant was here and the other assailant boxed him into that back gate area, right? So what I assume happened is somebody, like I said, there was probably 4 people. You had a person out front watching. You had 2 folks dealing with Nicole, probably just one distracting her, the other one slicing her from behind. And then while that's going on, you have a guy on lookout out back. Well, Goldman walks in. He's walking into a death trap because they all just convene in this one corner on him, and he's stuck. Right. That's what all the evidence shows to me. Let's not look at all this stuff. That's what seems to have occurred here, right?
Well,
That's
what's
not what
this
Mark Fuhrman here
D-bag
will tell you.
pointing at right here?
I mean, who knows? Oh, who knows, right? It's Fuhrman.
It's
think that's-
Fuhrman, fucking
Yeah, it's
douche.
Fuhrman. But you can see all this bloody stuff here from Nicole Brown Simpson, right? So
Yes.
we got
yeah.
her over here. So looking into that from the street, this is the front. So you'll see right to the right on this picture where the stairs are. If you go to the stairs to the right, that's where that kill zone was for Goldman. And then she's laying right here to the left of that, and her legs are stuck underneath the gate. That's what I'm saying. She had come outside, and somebody had surprised her to distract her. And the other person seems to have come up from behind the gate there and just, done. You know what I mean?
Practically decapitated her.
Yeah, that's why you can see her laying there at the base of the stairs, right? And with her feet going off to the left where there's a gate, right? You really can't see her, but her feet are underneath the gate, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like somebody distracted her to the front. Well, somebody from the back sliced her up, and her feet, had gotten jammed up on. However she died, she had to have been right up against that gate in order for her legs to be underneath that gate by about a foot.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
All right. I got
that or someone dragged her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can see to her head to the right is where Fuhrman was just standing, pointing in right there. And that's the kill zone again with Goldman in that little area. But Goldman never comes to this tiled brick over here, apparently. Right. But again, the evidence on his shoes would state otherwise. So
you're thinking he was slipping and sliding all over the damn place as he was getting attacked. Yeah. Okay.
Trying to fight off two. At that point in time, he was probably trying to fight off 3 assailants, right? Because the other guy was done with Nicole at that time.
Finished her off. Okay.
Yeah. And he's giving the other 2 problems and making a lot of noise. They had a dozen phone calls to 911. I'm sorry, not to 911. They had a dozen ear and eye witnesses to these events between 10:32 and 10:42, right? When the dog seen chasing the vehicle away at 10:45, right? Roughly 10:45. So there's no shortage of reports of these things. Again, why not? I suspect 911 was called. They claim it was not until 12:08 or something like that. And the 9-minute response at 12:17 to a robbery. And then the neighbor with the dog's like, "Hey, my neighbor's murdered. I'm glad you guys finally got here." So I don't think they're being. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't think they're being honest about these timeline of events with the 911 calls.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense.
You can see where her legs are tucked underneath that gate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she had to be like standing up through that gate, or maybe just walk through that gate, even, right? Who knows? But nonetheless, she seems to have been attacked from behind. And again, Goldman is 3 feet north of her head there. And again, he came in through the back gate allegedly, right? So it seems like again he was cornered once he walked in there. And this area where she's laying was hosed down within 12 hours after the murders. Within on the 13th, the back gate, was the focus only because that's the only area they claim to have found Simpson's blood at the scene.
So did they ever look at the boot print on her to like say for sure that was OJ?
Yes, ma'am. And in fact, they did DNA tests on the blood on her body and DNA under her fingernails because she ostensibly scratched her attacker when he's coming from behind, right? Not OJ's DNA. Neither the blood nor under the fingernails.
All right.
Here is the evidence they had against OJ. He sliced his finger, right? Again, as by his own admission when he got the phone call of his wife's murder. And, his kids were in the home that night. So obviously, I would suspect he probably was alarmed, right? Again, OJ knows what happened here. OJ was not involved in the murders. OJ's definitely associated with all these activities, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, he understands what occurred, right? But again, at the same time, like, that's the evidence they had again. OJ sliced his finger allegedly on the glass in Chicago on a trip that was pre-planned that Van Adder and the PCA. He fled the country. He fled the town. He's like, it was an unplanned trip to Chicago. He fled on an overnight red eye after the murders. That was what was put in the probable cause affidavit.
If she had like DNA under her nails and Ron clearly put up a fight, so OJ should look pretty fucked up at this point. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And you saw the pictures. He's got no bruising.
Right. His finger looks nasty, but it doesn't look like I just murdered 2 people with my bare hands nasty.
Yeah, it looks like a deep cut from glass to me.
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, JJ, I'm so glad you're changing my mind on this because up until this point, they've done a great sales job on making everybody think that it's him.
For sure. No, for sure. And relative to the Idaho case, it's the same deal. They have DNA evidence found on the victims under their nails that don't match the suspect. They have blood on the scene that they never ran through any kind of tests, and they just ruled out, they can confirm it wasn't the suspect they have in custody. So they have, this is again another correlation. They have evidence on the bodies at the crime scene, DNA, blood, under fingernails that would indicate there was a struggle with Nicole Brown Simpson and with one of the Idaho victims. The state ignores it in both circumstances. They got their guy.
Wild.
They had their guy at 253 when Fuhrman went over there, left an active crime scene, went over there, and then later jumped the fence without a search warrant in violation of Orenthal James Simpson's constitutional rights. Again, these things are never discussed, right? Like, Van Adder would testify, well, I felt there was an emergent need to go into the house to make sure OJ was okay. Well, then why the fuck did you make yourself at home in his kitchen and start making phone calls?
That just does not make any sense whatsoever.
Right. So here's a diagram of the crime scene, since it was a little bit difficult to follow from those kind of partial pictures. So we saw that scene from the sidewalk going forward, right? So we can see that here with Nicole laying there. This scene right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see that on the diagram. That's the view we get on the diagram right here, right? Looking at Nicole right here with her legs stuck under here. Like I said, he's boxed in this little kill zone in like a 2 by 3 foot area right here, right? Mm-hmm. And again, that the glove and mask, the glove and hat are right here with laying on top of some leaves, right, and kind of in between the bodies right here along the fence line. I think that's what Fuhrman was pointing out. Now, this area that we're looking at here was all washed up and cleaned on the 13th. Mm-hmm. However, the back gate back here north of Fuhrman here along this pathway, that's the area where they found Orenthal James Simpson's blood at the scene and claimed that's, that he came back in through that gate to look for the bloody glove and the hat that he dropped, the same stuff that was immediately visible because it was laying right there. You know what I mean? He couldn't find it. And then he drops the other glove, sneaking back into his house because the limo driver was there, as the story goes, except for, once again, these timelines don't match up.
How do you figure she got her feet under the gate?
That's what I'm saying. So she either came through that gate and then was startled, and then someone from behind her is the one who, or she would walk down and was standing next to that gate and startled by something, you know what I mean? But either way, she's up against that gate in order to get her, in my opinion, in order to get her legs under there, unless someone pulled her there, which there didn't seem to be any evidence of that in the blood.
This is so interesting to me. You're literally blowing my mind right now. I mean,
Nice.
It's like, why the fuck didn't we look for other suspects if this is what we had to work with?
Well, I'll tell you why. It's part of the magic show. So Philip Van Adder wrote in that probable cause affidavit, we confirmed through DNA testing, this is, this is Orenthal J. Simpson's blood on June 17th. They didn't, less than 12 hours after he dropped that evidence off into the custody of police to process that evidence, right? Not to mention they couldn't process that in 3 days, right? All this DNA stuff. The leading expert in DNA and the guy who invented the test in which they used was volunteered to testify for the defense because he knew all of these claims by the state was bullshit. That man's name was Kerry Mullis. You may know him as the inventor and Nobel winner for the PCR test that was popularized infamously through the cough 2020 shutdown.
Wow. So, hey,
you go ahead.
What about this? Did OJ, was he like the mind behind the murders? Because that also counts.
No, I don't think he knew it was going down. I'm just saying he knew all this stuff that his ex-wife was associated with, right? He knew
but you don't think he could have had this set up?
No, I don't think he had it set up now. Again, I think it goes back to this upper echelons of this process network with Cocaine Bob and this white nationalist network and Nazis with Nazi felon Mark Fuhrman. And I'm glad you asked that question because that's where I was going next with this, Julia. So when we're building those characters, we also have to look at the mob too, right? So they're involved, right? So, but they're also part of the same, inherent vice, right? You have the mobsters involved in that same network. It's all part of the same kind of culty underground processing, network, right? So I just want to hit a couple high points on this autopsy before we close out. me close out with some of those Mafia and Cocaine Bob highlights. So this was from June 14th, 1994. And it says right here, sharp force wound to the neck, left side, hit the jugular. Like I said, this was a pro who was doing these things. He was going for the femoral artery in the leg. He hit the jugular in the neck. This person knew, whoever was wielding that knife and stabbing Ron Goldman knew what they were doing. Because you got to think about it. They're not only receiving blows and defending themselves while doing this, they're also still attaining their goal of hitting these key areas of their victim. Right. So multiple stab wounds to the chest, abdomen, and left thigh that we saw there. Penetrating stab wounds of chest and abdomen with right hemothorax and hemoperitoneum. So again, what I'm getting at again is you're not defending yourself and stabbing folks like this and achieving your goals and doing it so in a very quick amount of time. These are the same problems with the issues with the Idaho 4. They claim with the suspect there that he did these superhero maneuvers and, et cetera, in a very superhero amount of time. But multiple incised wounds of scalp, face, neck, chest, left hand, defensive wound. Multiple abrasions, upper extremities, hands, defensive wound. So when Tom Lang testifies under oath in court, because it's important to note, Tom Lang is currently doing YouTube tours and podcast tours describing how OJ did it.
Wow.
It's important to note he lied his face off when he said that Ron Goldman showed no signs of making any contact with his assailant. Not just the pictures, the coroner already concluded that.
Multiple incised wounds of the scalp, face, neck, chest, and left hand. That's
yes,
it's
ma'am.
not just one area. It's multiple areas of defensive wounds.
Yes, multiple, very much so. And again, so Ron Goldman, 25 years old, 171 pounds, 5'9" tall from crown to sole. So again, this man was allegedly, well versed in martial arts to some degree, and I would assert he definitely exhibited that, right? And is fighting off what I would claim 2 and then 3 assailants in this endeavor, right?
Yeah, 100.
I suspect it wasn't until that third guy came in there that they finally got him under control. Is what I suspect happened, right? And I suspect the third guy is because you saw it was on his left leg, right? I suspect is that stab wound to the femoral artery that got him is what took him down, and then then they did the rest of the rest of it after that, right? But I suspect that came in from the third guy who was done with Nicole by that point, and then came in from that side, right? Helping out the one guy from that side and one guy from the other side. But, I suspect based upon his that fight, I mean, he put a beating on some people. You know what I mean? So, and you ask why we don't ever hear these things. And again, back to this kind of Iran-Contra, Idaho-Contra idea. So, as I said, Bob Cocaine Evans was dealing with the Medellin cartel's #1 dude in America, Karen Greenberger, who's now the in the Roy Raiden murder. That was who he's doing cocaine trafficking with there in the 80s. She's the #1 suspect in her husband's murder, which happened 6 months prior to the Roy Raiden murder back in 83. I'm sorry, 6 months prior to her arrest in 88. She had murdered the her husband, the Medellin's #1 dude in America. He had just got identified in a court case of Carlos Slater as the #1 Medellin cartel guy. The Pablo Escobar and Carlos Slater start the Medellin cartel. This is the cocaine that was funneled in for the Iran-Contra stuff. This is depicted in the film Blow. Carlos Slater is the Johnny Depp's buddy in the film Blow, right?
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. The pilot from Florida in Blow? I suspect that's characters based on Larry Greenberger. That's the #1. He was identified as the Medellin cartel's #1 dude in America. 6 months later, he was murdered on his porch in Lake Okeechobee, Florida. Today, his wife is the ex-wife, or his wife at the time. She sits in prison in California for the murder of Roy Raiden. She gets charged in 88, 6 months after his murder. She thought the cops were contacting her about that murder. They were contacting her about the 83 murder of Roy Raiden. Mind you, this is 5 years later, right? So what I'm saying is a lot of hood rat shit going on with these people during this time. But nonetheless, you got Cocaine Bob dealing with the upper echelon of all these Medellin Iran-Contra stuff, right? And then again, you see Iran-Contra even on OJ's defense team with F. Lee Bailey. And the reason I think you see all these correlations from Manson to OJ to the Idaho 4 stuff is as a result of the same network, right? Just these things are erupting to the public surface. For example, the guy who did the biopic film of Bob Cocaine Evans' life, right? His biopic documentary, The Kid Stays in the Picture. Braden Carter, he was the executive producer that Bob hired for the job. Cocaine Bob, that is. He's the guy running the propaganda campaign against Brian Koberger in the Idaho 4 case, believe it or not.
What?
Yeah. So Graydon Carter,
on.
that's what I'm saying. But the reason we see these things is because it's an ongoing network that flies below the surface level of society of hood rat shit that involves money laundering, drug trafficking, murder, and cult stuff, right? And spooks, right? So Graydon Carter, again, executive producer for The Kid Stays in the Picture, but he opened an outlet called Airmail in 2019. Well, they hired Howard Bloom. That outlet, this weird weekly publication on the interwebs, is called Airmail, hires Howard Bloom, this alleged famous writer, to write this story about how Brian Koberger did it. He starts that story the day after they bring Brian Koberger back to Idaho on January 6, 2023. But it's odd that he'd be employed by Graydon Carter in this effort at Airmail because, again, Graydon Carter was really good friends with Bob Cocaine Evans. So we see the white Bronco here. That's Al Callens, right? That was the driver. I was going to talk about that, but since we're on Bob Cocaine, we'll close out with Al Callens and the mob, and we'll go back to Bob Cocaine and the any other stuff here while we're at it. Do you have any thoughts on any of that there, Julia?
I mean, it's just so convoluted. It reminds me of did you ever listen to that podcast called The Clown and the Candyman?
Yeah,
and it was about so it's like all of these prolific pedophiles that were in network with each other, but they were working throughout the entire United States, like John Wayne Gacy and like all these guys from Texas and all these guys from like Chicago and all over the place. It's like, if you look hard enough, there is a spider web that's connecting everyone.
I think you are correct. Yes, ma'am. So, and on that note, we see that here with Bob Cocaine Evans, who was good friends with OJ. He used to always go over to Bob's house and play tennis. He's dating Paula Barbieri, the woman that OJ allegedly called before he leaves his home to go murder his ex-wife, as the state claims, at 10:03 p.m. that evening. Right? So we see Bob, the handiwork of old cocaine Bob Evans in a lot of spots, right? And again, from Manson, who he introduced Polanski and Tate, to Idaho, where Graydon Carter's running the propaganda campaign, his buddy, Graydon Carter, and where Vicky Gooch is the lead detective and integral part of the case against Koberger from the state, and her father was the underling of Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tate. So when we speak of this network, I think it stays within the network, right? They keep it confined and contained to the best of anyone's ability. But it is that connection though with the Medellin cartel, the coke trafficking, cocaine Bob, and one of the state's lead witnesses, that we find a character named Anthony Fiatto. This was the boyfriend of Nicole Brown Simpson's sister, Denise Brown.
Mm-hmm.
She was the chief witness in the domestic violence motivated prosecution of Orenthal James Simpson. He was a mafia hitman.
What?
Yep. He was a mafia hitman. They even roll him into the trial at one point to say that
to do what?
To say that Van Adder didn't target OJ Simpson and he was just the ex-husband and that they were just going to investigate him anyway. Cops deny statement about OJ search. That was, and then again, that's the state's lead witness boyfriend. He's a mafia hitman, right? So back to all the drug trafficking through, again, the Iran-Contra drug trafficking, cocaine Bob, these mafia Italian restaurants that Mezzaluna and stuff, like where Nicole Brown Simpson's roommate was the manager and where Goldman was the... Yeah.
Oh my God. It never ends.
Denise Brown linked to mafia enforcer. That's that guy, right? Mm-hmm. She refuses to answer questions about this today. She likes to do tours for domestic violence, but refuses to answer questions about her former hitman boyfriend.
Wow. And her mob executioner boyfriend, in her own words.
Yep. Oh, questions of mafia man irritate victim sister. This is a headline from 95 during the trial. So they wouldn't roll him out till January of 96 near the end of the trial. But again, this is a weird confluence of events, right? So if you're, if anyone was looking at the situation, be like, oh, gee, I wonder what kind of hitman could have been involved in this operation. Oh, wonder if it was the state's lead, prosecution witness's boyfriend. Oh, we'll roll him in later anyway for a witness anyway. You know what I mean? It's just such a strange trial. Right? Very strange, right?
So you got all these elements going on all the way up to the mob?
Oh, it gets better. Oh, and I'm going to get right back into the mob in 1 second because we have CIA Director William Colby's son is a prosecution witness, Carl Colby, who from 1992 to 1994 was the next door neighbor to Nicole Brown Simpson, that Keith fellow who manages the mob restaurants of cocaine trafficking, and Cato Kalin all lived in a home next door to Carl Colby, the son of CIA Director William Colby, who himself would die mysteriously in 1996.
Right.
Colby,
I know a lot about William Colby. What the fuck?
Yeah. So here's Carl Colby's testimony in the trial. You know, again, he was a next door neighbor and friend. Apparently, socialized with his circle. Knew Orenthal James Simpson. So when I say Iran Contra and this stuff, you know what I mean? How much closer do you want to get than the CIA director's son?
Testimony of Carl Colby. What the fuck?
Right?
What does he have to do with any of this?
Exactly. He just lived next door to him, and he testified that OJ beat Nicole during that time over there with those 911 calls, and he was a dick. That was kind of the thrust of his testimony.
JJ, no. Why?
I figured you'd enjoy. I wanted to save that one towards the end. I figured you'd enjoy that one.
Oh my God. So what about okay, they've done an excellent job making it look like it's OJ, right?
Well, I mean, you got the CIA director's son involved. What kind of spin are we looking for here? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I no, 100. But what I was gonna say is, if you knew you were innocent, but you had been convicted guilty in the minds of America because of this stuff, why would you go on to write a book called If I Did It?
Because I think he knew, he knew who did it, and he knew kind of how it went down, and you know what I mean. He wanted to. I think he wasn't a bright man. He wanted to profit off of it because he was broke at the time, right? So I think that's kind of
it was a money grab.
Yeah, it was a money grab. So, but you asked how this happened, this low speed chase. So he's hiding out at Kardashians. They charge him on the 17th. He's supposed to turn himself in. He gets into a car with his old buddy Al Callens. And Al Callens is the driver of this white Bronco. They drove around town and became a big event, right? Al Callens was the bodyguard to that Colombo Mafia dude, Joey Ippolito, who was one of the owners in that restaurant franchise of the drug trafficking at Mezzaluna.
Shut the fuck up.
I can't make this shit up.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, so Kardashian and Shapiro tell him to turn himself in. Him and Callens allegedly get in the car and drive around for the next 4 hours. Wherever they went, I don't know. That letter that Simpson wrote was alleged to be a suicide note. I think he thought they were going to kill him next.
Oh my God. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. Like I said, Paula Barbieri's on record of being at Kardashians during those 3 days from June 13th to June 17th there. Bob Cocaine Evans was probably over there too, in my assumption.
Well, yeah, 100.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. There's somebody in the chat that said, I'm 2.5 hours late. Did OJ do it or not? No, he didn't. Oh my God.
I appreciate you keeping up with the chat because I way behind as always with that.
It would appear he wasn't even in the room.
Yeah,
no, you're doing great. You're blowing my mind. Nice.
Yeah, I think the timeline, and I'll recap it at the end here. I think it just indicates that there's just no way he could have been there, right? So when we're looking at that drug trafficking network out of those restaurants, the mafiosos, right? So we have again other folks that are murdered. Like I said, the restaurant closes shortly after the murders, right? This is 97. LA restaurant made famous in the Simpson case closes doors, right? That's the Mezzaluna, part of that franchise, right? But we have folks that were that worked at that restaurant. They were friends with Goldman that were murdered. So we have Michael Nigg is his name, and he was murdered in a very Ron Goldman style situation. He was a fellow waiter there and likely, drug trafficker there at Mezzaluna.
How do you explain that, JJ? If this was OJ, how do you explain why people that were working with Ron Goldman at this fucking restaurant ended up dead in a
Yep.
similar fashion. How do you explain that? And by the way, what the fuck is that really his last name?
It is Michael Nigg, yes. And I like where your head's at, because that's exactly where I'm at, and he's not the only one. So there's multiple people in the aftermath and preceding events that are connected to this whole situation. So, and OJ's friends too, and OJ's mobster buddy from Buffalo who owns a club in Miami who gets bumped off. I think it's 12 days before OJ. And that case has been proved to be bunked through numerous appeals. They just pinned it on 2 dudes. It's been proven that, in recent years, that those guys did not commit that murder. But again, that's one of OJ's friends. We'll get to it in a minute. Kazimierz Sukarski is his name, and he came to visit OJ shortly before the murders, actually, out in Los Angeles. But yeah, Michael Nigg here, actual name. He worked with Ron there at Mezzaluna, right? He's murdered. So this is during the trial. So the trial.
During the trial? What? Uh-oh, JJ. JJ.
And remember how I said that they had a restaurant in Aspen that Nicole and her roommate.
No.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Can you actually go back up, because you cut out when you said he died a month after, and then it just cut out.
Oh, so it was 15 months. It was September of 95, but before the end of the trial in October of 95, right? So a lot of stuff was coming out publicly, and this dude gets murdered again. He's working at Mezzaluna. He's going between the Aspen locations and the Malibu locations, right? Like Nicole and her roommate Keith, the manager, were doing. So seemingly these are connecting points between these drug trafficking operations, if you ask me. Oddly enough, I'll save that story for a different day.
What?
It involves Aspen cocaine trafficking and the comedian Joey Diaz, and how I suspect he got involved in this network.
Oh my God.
He by his own admittance, he was the drug mule for Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston. He would fly them cocaine around the place. And
my God.
Yeah, and he came from Aspen, and again, I've identified some stuff around that time frame with Aspen and these folks. So I'm just saying.
So this guy's clearly involved with something to end up dead, first off, but it's like he died. It wasn't like 7 years later he died. He died during the trial.
Yeah, and I did, and I got the details mixed up. Yeah, he died during the trial. He got shot. So Goldman's other buddy, who was also friends with Nicole, Brett Cantor, he's the one who got stabbed a bunch of times, Goldman style, and that happened 11 months before Goldman. So he was a record executive and concert promoter and nightclub owner who was one of his acts he managed was Dionne Warwick. So when I said the Colombo crime family, there's Dionne Warwick connections there, and Dionne Warwick connections because that's first cousins with Whitney Houston. There's more to these stories, is what I'm saying, but perhaps for a different time. But Cantor was associated with both Nicole and Goldman here, and was brutally stabbed and murdered on the night of early morning of July 30th, 1993. Cantor left another nightclub, Club 434, not the one that he owned, and he was not known to have been seen alive after that. Later that day, his body was found at his Hollywood home, a short distance from his nightclub, Dragonfly. He had been stabbed 23 times around the head and arms. His throat had been cut almost to the point of decapitation. Some accounts also report he was given a Colombian necktie. His tongue pulled through his incision of his lower jaw as well. The old Colombian necktie.
Oh, come on.
And we're talking about Colombian drug traffickers here, aren't we? The Medellin cartel, right?
His throat had been cut almost to the point of decapitation, just like Nicole.
Yeah.
And he had been stabbed 23 times, just like
Yes,
Ron.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
JJ,
and knew both of them.
What?
And knew both of them. You know what I mean?
No.
Right.
And he was dating, I think it said he was dating Rose McGowan.
Oh, he was. Yeah, that's right. He was dating Rose McGowan. That's right.
The one who came out with all the pedo stuff.
The same one that grew up in the Children of God cult with the Phoenix kids. And
yeah, but wasn't
same one that dated Neo Process member Marilyn Manson, who lived in the Tate LaBianca death house. I believe shortly Well, I think that was actually shortly before they met, but he lives there again now, though, too. So,
Oh, JJ, that's got to be connected.
yes, ma'am, I would agree. This is what you're pointing out, I think, is evidence of a larger network, right? This larger network that's unfamiliar to us publicly because these events are sold to us through this spooky Iran-Contra, Idaho-Contra network style stuff. And we're sold these details in a fictional fashion to where most of the public doesn't know up from down, you know what I mean, on these subjects, right? This is that criminalist that I couldn't find it before where he's walking around with the vials. So they don't find out about that until May of 96. Gary Siglar, a supervising criminalist at LA County Coroner's Office, said investigators neglected to take very small foreign blood droplets from the slashed body of yada, yada, yada. He goes on to say that Van Adders got the blood vials of everybody because he got Simpson's when Simpson gave it to him on the 13th, and then he went over to the coroner's office to get the victim's blood, and that's what they find out after the trial, right? After. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
I mean, what are some of your thoughts before I close this home on this mafia stuff here?
I can't even begin to tell you all the ways that you've shaken my reality.
Nice.
I mean,
like it.
It's just on a surface level, it's easy to believe that he did it or his kid did it or he hired somebody to do it and maybe he wasn't there, but he was behind it. None of that is true. None of that
That's
can
correct.
be true based on the forensic evidence.
Yes, ma'am. And again, back to that cleanup operation. So this guy right here, Kashmir Butch Casey Sukarski, was murdered on June 6, 1994, when two masked gunmen burst into his home in Miramar, Florida. Back to that Florida connection in Miami. This guy was a nightclub owner down there, right? Him and two ladies, two of his strip club strippers, were murdered in his home there in this event. And this is an article talking about how the forensics were all fictionalized in that, and they just pinned it on these two dudes. One of them they let out, the other one they just keep retrying, even though they have no evidence against the guy. So he's actually a Spanish citizen. It's gotten to a weird diplomatic event I've been following as well. But this is part of that cleanup crew. So he gets murdered less than a week before Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And apparently in May of that year, 94, he visited Simpson out there in California. Again, this is his buddy from his Buffalo Bills playing days. He's a mobster nightclub owner from Buffalo. So
this is wild.
And then this came out during the trial. Report links Simpson's friend Callings to escape mobster, right? Again, this is the guys that own those restaurants, right? The epicenter of Colombo crime family and Bonanno crime family. But this is a fellow by the name of Lorenzo, right? Lorenzo and Ippolito. They were the two dudes that were involved in that mix. One was Colombo, the other one was Bonanno. So Andrew Russo was the you have Andrew Russo, you have Joey Ippolito, and you have a third guy, which is I forget his name. So the two main guys were Russo and Ippolito. So Russo is Colombo, and you can see him at his own wedding. He's got James Caan there in the front of this image back in the 70s. They go way back because it's when Andrew Russo gets busted there. Caan puts up his Malibu home for bail for the guy. Again, he's got a minority interest in that restaurant group in one of the locations of the pizza place in Beverly Hills. But it's Ippolito who Al Callings is the Colombo guy. Al Callings is his bodyguard and driver. So the guy who's driving, Simpson around on this, slow-paced masquerade around Los Angeles that day on June 17th. I mean, he's even involved in the mix, right?
Oh my God. What the fuck?
Right? I mean, we were all kind of sold Al Callings as the guy, the driver. No one really said much about it. And even when it was ran in national media, no one really touched on it,
Because it was like, don't look over here.
Yep. I suspect that. Go ahead.
Well, what exactly did they say about Mezzaluna closing? Was it shortly after the trial?
Yeah, so the trial ends in October of 95, and they close, I think, in March of 97. They're closed.
So
the owner sold it. He went into the gas industry. He's a Lebanese fellow. That's a different story altogether.
I was going to say, there's something going on with that, too, because all of this is linked. even the closing of the restaurant and like Ron Goldman and them running coke and doing whatever, like this is all important. You there?
Oh, for sure. And again, I think it's all, but you're getting the coke from the Medellin cartel through like folks like Bob Cocaine Evans' friend Karen Greenberger and co-conspirator and murder Roy Radin. If you're getting your coke through there, you know, and they're going to cover up her husband's murder for 30 plus years, even though she's in prison today in California for Radin's, you know, you don't want to start letting cats out of bags because suddenly things start, you know, getting real weird. And you find F. Lee Bailey running a CIA drug running bank out of Miami that is deeply invested in a junk bond scandal out of Wall Street, right? Involving the likes of Jeffrey Epstein's friends.
Mm-hmm. My God. Don't you feel bad for OJ?
Did I freeze or did I just freeze your brain hole?
Well,
that's what I'm saying. Like, so his that's what I called his nightmare team, right? Like they may have got him off, right? But
yeah, but not really. Dude, I would have went down.
He still lived his entire life under this.
I would have went to dying on the hill saying that he did this.
Right. So I actually have one more video as we close this out. I'll play this one more video on the forensic evidence that demonstrates he did not do this. So this guy actually a tow truck driver, I guess, for some regard. He had to move the white Bronco from the police impound lot 2 weeks after the murders, right? And he testified that there was no blood on that door. And this is a clip from the trial where he's emphasizing that, even though Marcia Clark, the Scientologist lady, is demanding otherwise.
First photograph, he labeled as A, shows the driver's panel with the numbers 21, 22, and 23. First, I'm going to show it to you, sir, and ask you if you were looking for little smears of blood like those marked in the markers of 21, 22, and 23.
Just inform that question.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
The red substance near 22, the number 22? Okay, and you see the red substance near 21? You see the red substance near 23? Now, if you were told, sir, that this photograph was taken on June the 14th, a week prior to your getting into the Bronco, would it change your opinion or your testimony, Eddie, that you did not see any blood on the driver's door?
Check the form of that question since the fact not evidence.
So the day that I seen the Bronco,
yes,
there was no blood.
You saw no blood in any of these areas. Is that your testimony, sir?
Can I just put this up?
Sure.
I can tell you that I didn't see any blood here. I didn't see any blood here. This might be possible, but I didn't see anything here.
This is 21.
Wait,
This one.
For the record, I'm going to describe what the witness has just said.
Excuse me.
So based upon that evidence, as you can see, the guys moving the car weeks later is like, I wasn't there. And the fact that they had blood vials and then blood later was missing from those vials, you know, so I presume the blood was transferred to a new vial.
Right.
Implanted later.
It makes me want to go back and watch the trial again from start to finish, knowing what I know now, because they were clearly planting stuff.
Yeah, again, for sure, 100%. And even the jurors have made statements today saying that we knew that's part of their deliberations. There's one juror, she's like, we never discussed race. We talked about Fuhrman planting stuff, Van Natter planting stuff, and how OJ clearly didn't do it. But again, it's how these things were packaged to us. So the jurors aren't talking race, even though there's clearly racial considerations in these matters. And this is after high racial tensions in LA.
Oh, no. JJ.
Am I back?
Yes, you said they didn't discuss race because clearly they were planting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like a couple of the jurors' statements, they make to the effect of we knew they were planting stuff and named Fuhrman and Van Natter, and they're like, we understood there was racial tensions. Again, this is at the time after Rodney King and the riots and everything in LA.
Do you think that was just a bad coincidence that this all happened around that time?
I think the folks that were perpetrating these crimes that do so in a manner in which to create social turbulence in a manner that's so chaotic, they have to have a boiling point and build up. So we saw that boiling point and build up with Rodney King, the LA riots, and the breaking point was supposed to be this case. and they didn't achieve their goals, I don't think. Right? It's that helter-skelter concept of the process church kind of theology, right? Of creating chaos, which is based upon the Tavistock's social turbulence research.
I mean, to me, that's always played a part in it too, because I was like, they gave him like a mostly black jury, and it was in the middle of some crazy shit, and it was like, of course they're gonna find him innocent, and he got away with it, and da. They made a mockery of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you can look at the evidence, right? The timeline of events, even as sold, and what was known, and the censorship of some of the witnesses that didn't fit that, the ignoring of the evidence that wasn't OJ's, the DNA under the nail of Nicole Brown, the blood on her body that wasn't OJ's, right? We see them redesigning the entire scene by saying Ron Goldman never came over there towards Nicole, and yet the blood on his feet. He had blood on her blood and his blood on the bottom of his sneakers. So,
dude, he definitely slipped in that blood or walked through it. At least.
And then for sure. And we get the evidence that he did make contact with his assailants 20 years after the fact. But during the hearing, we get Mr. Tom Lang, who's currently doing YouTube tours, convincing everyone that even though OJ's dead, and he's still trying to convince folks, Orenthal James Simpson did it. This is the guy who testified under oath saying that Goldman never made contact with his assailants, yet the coroner's report and all photographs clearly dictated otherwise.
That's just absolute travesty of justice.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, so, and obviously we'll never know who really did it.
That's probably true. Yes, ma'am. I would agree with that. Yeah.
But again, just in summary, what do you think was the motive to kill these two?
So I think there is an argument to be made by Stephen Singular's source from the LA District Attorney's Office, who notified him that it was part of this white nationalist underground movement that was actually spawned from a meeting in Hayden Lake near Sandpoint, Idaho. Mind you, 3 of the victims live within a 10-mile radius of where this meeting took place, according to the LA prosecutor's office. This is the same area where the order was in a shootout with the FBI back in, I think, 1984 over the murder of Alan Berg and a number of bank robberies on their previous domestic terrorism campaign, right, in 1984. So fast forward 10 years, right, according to the LA prosecutor's office, they were repeating that same plan via a same meeting at the same location from 10 years prior, so in the wake of the 10-year anniversary of Alan Berg's death, which occurred, I believe, a week prior to the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson. According to the investigation done by the LA County prosecutor's office, according to Stephen Singular and the intel he received from them, and took to the defense, and the defense told him to go fuck themselves. They told him that this was all a network, it was connected to these campaigns, and they wanted to kill a white woman who was a race traitor, as they put it, and they were looking to again, the way it was described as Singular and the way he reports it in his book there, A Legacy of Deception about Mark Fuhrman. It was printed during the trial. Again, because everyone, after the deputy prosecutor notified him all this stuff, and he contacts the defense, and everyone told him to go fuck himself. He's like, well, I'm going to write this then. So that's what he did. And 6 months later, he published it. And so this was a whole network embedded with folks in government like Fuhrman, who, according to numerous reports, was wearing Nazi memorabilia underneath his, Nazi rank underneath his lapel, got fired for being an ardent Nazi. A report that was written during the trial, a trial where he perjured himself, pled the fifth, got a felony, created a disaster for everybody, and I think that was his goal from moment one. So not only was it the chaotic event of the murder of this white woman, right, who he chose, and I'll get to that in a second. Fuhrman, I believe, is the one who selected the victim in all this. He's apparently a very powerful figure, according to that report in Stephen Singular's book, a powerful figure within this network, right, this Nazi network, right? And again, he lives up there today and is commenting on the Idaho 4 case. Numerous victims are from that area. One of those victims, her uncle, her dad's brother, ardent Nazi. Can't make this shit up.
Oh, come on.
Cannot make this shit up. I'm just trying to find a real picture of him because I Muppetized him. Yeah, I Muppetized him. Yeah, I Muppetize everybody anymore, especially in the Idaho 4 case. But this is him wearing a Nazi uniform addressing a rally in, I believe, 2010. I changed, this is the real, I'm just describing, this is a real uniform. I just gave him a Muppet head and I wrote Koberger is innocent and spray paint on the back wall just to be a jackass about it. But that is one of the victim's uncle. And again, that's, he's not from that area. He's actually from like the Portland area, but his niece and his brother are up there in that Sandpoint Hayden Lake area, just north of Coeur d'Alene, or just north of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Same place Fuhrman lives. Same place the order's from. Same place allegedly the meeting took place in 1994 and 1984 to hatch these nationwide domestic white nationalist terror events. And again, there's a lot to be said about these things because incorporated, I think, in that 90s movement was the Kehoe brothers. You familiar with that shootout in Wilmington, Ohio? The Kehoe brothers, they exchanged shots with the Ohio State Police from a distance of, I believe, 9 meters. I think 16 shots and no one gets hit. Well, do you know the name Israel? Hit. No one gets hit. Do you know the name Israel Keys? Serial killer from Alaska to Vermont and back.
No.
Lots of. Oh well, I'll have to get you educated on him sometime here soon, man. But Israel Keys and the Kehoe brothers just happen to grow up with each other in Idaho. So there's a lot to be said about these things.
Oh, come on.
There's a lot to be said about these things.
There's a lot to be said about serial killers in general and murders in general. I mean, the person who killed Nicole might be a serial killer, but we'll never know.
Right. So when we're looking at this network, though, I mean, we're looking at parts and pieces of this network. We're trying to describe this network like the old Buddhist principle of the 6 blind men, holding different parts of the elephant, describing the elephant in which they can describe it because they can't see it, they can only feel. But they're not seeing the bigger picture of this giant creature, right? And that's kind of what we're describing here. You're describing a tail, I'm just describing a trunk or a foot, and we're missing the entire thing. But I think that entire creature revolves largely around a fellow by the name of Bob Cocaine Evans, who rears his ugly head in all of these scenes. From Manson to OJ to Idaho, you're going to find old Cocaine Bob. And you want to look to why things we don't know about these things. One of his closest associates, Henry Kissinger, one of the men sampling things national security.
Come on.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Henry Kissinger's right-hand man, retired Major General from the Air Force, Brent Scowcroft, his assistant, started one of the neo-process cults, a fellow by the name of J.J. Bryan.
Wow, dude.
So we got 40 years apart, we got process surrounding one dude, Henry Kissinger, and none other than Cocaine Bob Evans. And it is Cocaine Bob that went into business with the Colombo crime family in which to produce the film Godfather. So when we're seeing those Colombo characters later in the 90s, he's had associations with them for 20 plus years by that point in time.
Where the fuck did this guy come from?
Oh, Cocaine Bob? None other than Westchester County, New York, the epicenter. It's the den of iniquity up there. I don't think there's much that comes out of it that's worthwhile.
Wow. This guy is legit, like, behind everything.
I think he's a major character. And again, I think that's why Maury Terry stopped his active Son of Sam investigation in the early 90s and concentrated on the OJ Simpson case because he saw all the hallmarks of Bob's work, Cocaine Bob, in that ordeal.
Wow. I wonder if McGowan looked into this at all because he was a fan of Maury Terry.
It was McGowan that I learned about the blood vials from Van Adder and weird scenes inside the canyon.
Oh, yeah.
I think he also is the one who reports that Van Adder was on scene at the Tate Polanski home as well as a rookie officer.
The Tate Polanski and the 4 on the floor connection too is blowing my mind.
Which and that's Tom Lang. Again, these guys are, they're working together, not necessarily always immediately together, but they're on same cases in all these different major events and running bagman operations. And again, I would be remiss if I was talking about the Tate Polanski murders, Cocaine Bob, and I didn't at least make a final considerations for one of my favorite characters in the Idaho case, and that is Victoria Gooch, who I like to call AKA the Gooch. So she's that ISP detective who's involved in all the integral evidence in the case, this fictional case against Brian Koberger, right? Her father was Paul Tate, U.S. Army intelligence protege for numerous assignments over many years. They moved to the Bay Area the same time. Her father went undercover for like 3 years. She never saw him. Paul Tate's undercover that same time, allegedly investigating his daughter's murder, actress Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate, murdered by the Manson family. Two of the first officer on scene at the Simpson Goldman murders, Richard Wally, was one of the early officers on scene at Tate Polanski. The lead detective at Van Adder, one of the early officers on scene at Tate Polanski. And again, that's the Gooch's father's mentor, was Paul Tate there in U.S. Army Intelligence. And, Bob Cocaine Evans is the one who brokered that Tate Polanski marriage. And we see, folks from Rosemary's Baby like Charles Grodin selling this OJ narrative. He gets a start courtesy of Bob Cocaine. We see James Caan hiding the mafia figures involved with the drug trafficking, right? He's in business within the restaurant business. He gets his career thanks to Bob Cocaine Evans, so I think all these things are interesting.
And Nicole's sister is literally dating, right?
A mob
What's
hitman.
his name? A mob hitman, but
Anthony Fiato.
Anthony Fiato.
And
that's just a coincidence.
And once everything falls out in the case, right? They call him in as a witness in the case in January of 95. I think it's January.
God damn.
It's late in the case. Yeah.
JJ, that's too much.
Right. And then back to the Manson case, you have Angela Lansbury, her daughter. She signed a letter for her daughter to be under the guardianship of Charles Manson, her, I believe, was 14-year-old daughter. So her 14-year-old daughter was a member of the Manson family. When the Manson family gets charged, Charles and some of his girls and Tex Watson and get charged, Angela hightails it back to the homeland of Ireland, right? But she's obviously famous for Murder, She Wrote, right? And again, this is my depiction of the Gooch because she's a murder mystery writer herself, strangely enough. And again, it's her father that goes right back to that Tate Polanski murder. Right? And again,
come on. She is a murder novelist.
Yep. She teaches classes on murder mystery fiction.
Shut the fuck up. She'd be great at it, right?
I think she is. I think she's the one who's largely scripted this bullshit narrative around Kohberger. I mean, it's falling apart, but
this is too much, JJ.
I'm glad I could help change your mind there, Julia. I know it's been a lot of information. I wish I could keep up with the comments. It looks like the folks of the interwebs have enjoyed our discussion here on these matters. Do you have any closing statements or any? I know I've kept you here a long time here this evening, but I appreciate everyone's time and attention. Do you have any closing statements on some of these ideas, or just your general thought on the events around OJ, Scientology, this ongoing criminal enterprise that seems to revolve around drug and trafficking and hood rat shit?
Well, when we started this episode, I said, I hope you can change my mind, and you definitely have. So congrats, JJ Vance, not vice president. I would say 100% OJ Simpson did not do it. I don't think his son did it. I don't think, he paid somebody to do it. All of the, the theories out there. I will say whether or not Nicole was actually a dude, that's still up for debate. I mean, whether she had a penis or not, she definitely got murdered.
Or if she's Megyn Kelly.
Or she's Megyn Kelly.
I'm happy to consider if she's a dude, but I'm also equally as happy to consider she might be Megyn Kelly.
Right. I mean, this was incredible. I feel like I learned so much. I don't know about anybody in the comment section, but I can tell you straight up, I enjoyed every minute of it. And the time passed so quickly. I looked up and I was like, oh my God, we've been going 3 hours. That's crazy. It doesn't even feel like that.
That was my reaction. I was like, holy shit, I've been talking a while. I didn't realize that.
No, but I didn't even feel like that because I looked up and I was like, oh, damn. I mean, that's a lot of information and actually a pretty short amount of time. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did, but damn, I mean, the bag and the stick, bro, all this stuff, it's nuts.
Right. Because again, that stuff was presented in real time in the trial and we were just all distracted. These talking heads from Bob Cocaine Evans' buddy Charles Grodin to Scientologist Greta Van Susteren to Charles Manson's buddy Ira Reiner to Dr. Phil, who's likely a Scientologist. These people all
I forgot about him.
Yeah, they all sold us this raw bill of goods on how to actually. They framed this stuff in in a manner in which to convince us, that our own eyes are deceiving us, and I think that's kind of part of what it's about, right? Creating this chaos by convincing folks that what you're seeing with your eyes that ain't real. What I'm telling you is real.
Yeah, like literally you can't believe your own eyes, even though it's right in front of you.
I think that's part of their goal in creating social turbulence. And look where we're at today. Look how much folks believe whatever is told. I mean, 94, I recall folks were skeptical. In the 80s, my grandmother said, don't ever believe anything you see on TV. And I said, oh,
No,
shit.
you can't.
She didn't graduate high school. She didn't graduate high school. She's an uneducated lady from Pikeville, Kentucky. But I tell you one thing, she was brilliant. You know what I mean? So,
well, my
she
family
knew what was going
is my family is also equally. My grandma and grandpa are from Butchers Creek, Kentucky, and they weren't.
Okay.
They
There
didn't
you go.
graduate high school either, and they were some of the smartest people I know. So
Yeah. There you go. And I saw a comment I wanted to address here real quick. I'm not, by no means am I trying to advocate or white knight for Orenthal James Simpson. The guy was into some hood rat shit. He knew exactly what went on and all these things. And as I demonstrated, socialized with all these weirdos, including Cocaine Bob. They were good friends. And apparently shared some ladies together.
Comment. I like that comment. OJ is still a piece of shit, but I don't think he did it anymore. That's where I'm at. That's a
great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
He definitely still is a scoundrel and a POS, as the comment said, but I mean, he didn't kill her. I mean, he just didn't. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, and again, I think we're, part of it is convincing us that, again, we're not seeing, oh, there's Kane, nice to see you there, sir. We're not seeing, the full picture because we're being directed in this magic show somewhere else, right? Follow the widget and shiny objects. And
Helter Skelter.
We're going to tell you what we're seeing. Yeah. Again, they bastardized that, right? There is an element to that was accurate and true, but they're bastardizing it later to twist it and, pervert it, right? And to not the truth, right?
100.
So,
Dude,
I think the same thing goes for all the
even-
Idaho stuff. We can apply everything we discussed tonight and apply it to Idaho, and it is the exact same framework. And as I've demonstrated, it includes some of the exact same people that go all the way back to Cocaine Bob and all the way back, major figures, the major propagandist in this. Major propagandist, Cocaine Bob's buddy, the lead detective, the daughter of Colonel Paul Tate's protege, who appears to have gone undercover with Colonel Paul Tate himself.
That is
and I should mention her law enforcement mentor, Victoria Gooch, is a cousin of Mark Fuhrman. Just saying.
So fucked up, dude.
Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed these details, Julie, and I definitely appreciate your time. And I'll give you one more time for closing statements. But I forgot I dropped this one on you, and it was included in the trial, and I don't want to belabor the point, but Mark Fuhrman was demonstrated to know personal details and likely intimate details of Nicole Brown Simpson's life, including the size of her new augmented breasts and the schedule of her children's custody with Orenthal J. Simpson. So he knew the intimate details of her life. So there's a lot more to that story.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That is so fucked. I was going to say, I feel like I didn't even contribute very much to the episode because there's no way I can prove him guilty.
Well, you're bringing the questions. You're the one who started this conversation. Like I said, I'm happy to address all these subjects because it's very relevant today. But when you mentioned that to me the other day, I'm like, well, I'm happy to answer any of your questions and take a baseline of your understanding of it, and we'll explain to you and the folks at the interwebs how that didn't work out that way. And we've all been sold a fucking bullshit magic show around OJ did it, and he did not.
Absolutely. Wow. Lori in the comments says, I'm with Julia now. I know he didn't do it. That's right, man.
Nice.
He didn't do it.
Yeah, I'm happy to have these conversations. The same shit's going on in Idaho. I'd argue it's the same spooky network of trafficking activities, cult and hood rat shit, and involves white nationalist politicians, police, law enforcement attorneys, and again, our fun-filled characters from OJ, like Mark Fuhrman, who's there loud and proud on TV telling everyone Brian Koberger did it, despite zero evidence supporting such claims.
Oh my God.
Bagmen are going to bag, though, right? Especially the Nazi
bagman gonna bag. That's right, JJ.
They never ask Fuhrman, like, hey, it says here you're a felon, and it says here you got fired or forced to return because you're a Nazi. No one ever asks him these questions, yet he's on TV all the time.
So
and as I showed you, those are documented facts. I mean, he signed the plea agreement. I mean, it's not. That's on him. He could have fought it, I guess. So
he knew he wouldn't get very far. He perjured himself.
For sure. So do you see what I'm saying? Is like this is kind of the framework we've been seeing since '69 through '94 on to 2022. Involves a lot of the same characters with tentacles going back all the way to those other scenes, right? And again, a lot of it's Scientology process stuff, if you ask me, but they're not the only ones. They work with other parties, the Mafia, the Nazis, there's, they convene, the spooks, right? It's like
Right.
Permadex. Permadex, the old board that was at the center of the JFK investigation of Jim Garrison. You had Joseph Bonanno, crime boss from New York City, who's one of his guys. Bonanno guy was the Ippolito, I believe, was the Bonanno guy there, Joey Ippolito, in the drug trafficking, the OJ case. Andrew Russo was the Colombo guy. So you have, Joseph Bonanno, Roy Cohn, who, according to David Berkowitz, was a member of the process, right? And then you have Clay Shaw, CIA dude, who was at the center of the Garrison investigation. They were on the board together, right? So what I'm saying is we're seeing these different facets. We have examples of them all working together in the past, 70 years ago, 60 years ago. You know what I mean?
70 years ago.
And today we're still going like, I don't know what's going on here. You know what I mean? This is some, people are blaming the Mafia. They're blaming the Nazis. They're blaming the cults. They're blaming the process cult or whatever. They're blaming the spooks with the Iran-Contra, Idaho-Contra. It's all the same. We're all talking about the same elephant, right?
100.
So that's what concerns me about these topics is we're still being afflicted by these today in our society. Folks like Brian Koberger are being railroaded in the systems. I can only imagine the number of folks have been railroaded under these pretenses of this network of activity. I'm sure I know that it's not the only one, say, but that's why I think it's relevant. I appreciate your time and understanding and open mind on the subject. What's your biggest takeaway, you think? Then we can close it out on that, and then anything you're working on, because I know it's 3 hours plus, and I appreciate your time, Julia.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed every minute of it. I think for me, just the forensic evidence not adding up, the connections between everyone involved,
right,
and the timeline doesn't add up, down to the driver in the low speed chase being connected. I mean,
yep.
JJ, it's too much. It's too much.
It's literally everybody, right? Including the prosecution's witnesses are clearly involved,
Yeah. And like I said earlier, the bag and the stick and all that, the when the car was impounded, nobody saw any blood on it. Then the vials are missing for 3 days, and then all of a sudden blood's everywhere. I mean, come on.
Yeah. The vials are missing for 3 days, and all of a sudden blood's everywhere, and the evidence finally gets admitted into evidence after that 3 days. And then they immediately arrest him, claiming in the probable cause affidavit that they had DNA evidence to support this arrest. They did not. That's the same case with Koberger. They did the same thing in Koberger with the same PCA nonsense and adapting it later to say they didn't have that shit.
Well, doesn't it make you want to look at other famous true crime cases and wonder if the motherfuckers actually did it? Like, do you think, for example, this one came up recently for me, and I just want your opinion. Scott Peterson. Do you think he did it or not?
I'm glad you said that. I think Edward Wayne Edwards in the same network of Hand of Death style cult network is involved in that. Just like that's who I think perpetrates these cult crimes that we're discussing, right? Is as Henry Lee Lucas explained the Hand of Death, he's describing an actual network he was not at the charge of. I think at the top of that Hand of Death assassin network, you'll find a man by the name of Edward Wayne Edwards.
You think he was involved in Lacey and Scott?
I think if he didn't have his direct hands in it, it's somebody within his assassin network. He's more like a military commander of assassins, I view him as. And the folks like Henry Lee Lucas under him are his soldiers. If he didn't do it, they use the same playbook to frame people, right? So it's the same case with Scott and Lacey Peterson. There's a very limited circumstantial case. The timelines don't match up. The prosecution bends and twists narratives throughout the entire prosecution and case and investigation. It seems to be a very occult ritualistic homicide, and I don't think Scott Peterson did it. But what I will say is, much like OJ, Scott Peterson is a fucking scumbag. He was involved in scumbag activities and found himself as a result of it. You're not going to convince me that a man who is the #1 fertilizer dealer in California, apparently for this huge fertilizer company, maybe even the nation, he's the #1 salesman. And he works in Modesto, California. Modesto, the capital of meth. They call it Modesto. And fertilizer just happens to be used in the production of meth. So you're not going to convince me there's not a direct connection there.
Well, I mean, it just interests me because if they do it to OJ, they can do it to anybody.
It's a
And they
playbook.
can
Yeah, for sure.
convince you. Even someone like me who is skeptical of everything can be convinced that the motherfucker did it.
I agree. You know, you're right. I don't fault anyone for buying into the magic show. You're paying attention to the circus here and believing the hype. Because again, it's well designed. It's a magic show intentionally. I would argue it's actual magic. And they're doing it with an operational plan from the beginning. This was an operational plan to establish these talking heads like Charles Grodin, like Greta Van Susteren, like Ira Reiner, like Dr. Phil. These folks that folks would believe these high profile crime events from. Like we got Nancy Grace today, even though we didn't have her back then. But I'm saying there's been evolutions of these characters. Ashley Banfield, she's doing a lot of the propaganda for Idaho 4. So the stuff that's written in that airmail article series, she then takes and reports on News Nation, this weird news program that showed up on the interwebs right around the time of the murders. You know, so she got her start in the OJ case out of Vegas, doing the national media on that for, I believe, CNN. So we see these figures built up and then sold to us as a general public to believe these storylines. These are trustworthy people. They're going to tell you the truth. And again, there was an operational plan, I think, that was enacted at OJ with the onset of this televising these trials.
I mean, 100. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't ever blame folks for buying into the hype or the.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the thing is they've done a bad, sloppy job, but an amazing job at the same time.
Yep, I would agree with you on that. Yeah, I mean, there's only so much they can do when you're trying to control narratives and stuff, and you can't plan in 1994 for the birth of the interwebs, right? Even though the birth of the interwebs is kind of connected to Moscow, Idaho, and in the case of there in a weird way through DARPA and stuff, but that's a different story altogether. But what I'm saying is you can't account for some of these factors, right, in the future, right? But you can account for some factors like never asking Mark Fuhrman why he's a felon Nazi and why anyone cares about his opinion.
That's a good one. Yeah.
You can account for that, and they do account for that. But there's some factors they can't account for. Some of them, a lot of fuck ups get fucked up trying to cover up the fuck up, if you will. So it's just you know what I mean?
I couldn't have said it better. Yeah. That's perfect.
That's the way I look at. We look at these things like people are brilliant. They're pulling these things out. A lot of times they're fucking up, and then they fuck up the cover. So it's and again when you're
right.
Sometimes we give folks a little bit too much credit on things. So, there's a lot of stuff that did get accounted for in here, a lot of stuff that didn't. But, I mean, in the end, they pulled off their goal.
Yeah, 100. That's crazy.
As sloppy as it was, in hindsight, they pulled off their goal. Again, we didn't know that Goldman made contact with his assailants because Tom Lang, the guy who's doing
picture for 20 years.
Yeah. And Tom Lang's doing media tours right now saying Orenthal James Simpson did it, yet he clearly lied under oath. Much like his buddies Van Adder and Fuhrman. But once again, OJ's dream team, or as I would claim, nightmare team, did not ask Van Adder nor Lang if they planted evidence. Why would they never do that? Why would they concentrate on Fuhrman? Right. So they played into all this stuff too. And again, I think the only person that cared about OJ on that team was Kardashian. And again, he's the one who hires Shapiro. Shapiro hires the rest of the scumbags. And, I don't think OJ had any, again, I don't think he's a brilliant man. It's not a rocket scientist.
No, definitely not. He married a tranny, for Christ's sake.
Well, I'm happy. We should definitely do that in the future. Whether or not she's a man, we'll have those conversations. I'd also like to discuss whether or not she's Megyn Kelly. Two individuals I understand both have cocaine problems, Megyn Kelly and Nicole Simpson. So.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Julia, I appreciate your time, and folks of Interwebs appreciate your time here this evening, and I hope other folks have kept an open mind on the topics of Orenthal James Simpson, these psyops, and this, what I would argue, this hood rat spook network of Iran Contra to Idaho Contra that still plagues our American society today. And, I think understanding it and identifying these things is step one, because 70, 30, 20 years later, we shouldn't just be figuring out, oh, shit, that was all bullshit. You know what I mean? But it's that Henry Kissinger national security style, we live in, you know what I mean? Like we live in this kind of, these ideas of national security since 1947. Three folks can stamp things national security. You're looking at one of them, Henry Kissinger, for numerous presidents. And then we don't know things, right? So we don't really have freedom of speech in this country. We haven't since the National Security Act of 1947, which I would argue is a exclusively Nazi venture. But yeah, I'm happy to discuss all the, conspiracies around Nicole Brown. Because again, I think, you know, once you start breaching the surface of this weird underlying network of our society with these characters, I mean, it gets weird pretty fast. So I think all bets are off. I think there's a lot of things that are possible.
100. I mean, I'm down to do whatever. Hopefully I'll be back on Operation GCD to discuss another cult classic movie in the future.
Oh, for sure. We're going to do that next month. And I believe it's going to be So I Married an Axe Murderer.
All right.
Nice. All right. Because you got a lot of the proto hippie stuff with the beatniks. You got a lot of some serial killer stuff, etc. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So, do you have anything you're working on before I plug some of my stuff here when we close this thing out for folks? Again, great conversation. We'll definitely be jumping down these rabbit holes again in the future. I appreciate your time, Julia. I
can't wait to be back on. No, plug whatever. I'm excited to hear about Robert the Doll. I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah. Well, he's kind of, I was supposed to do this last Sunday. Robert the Doll struck in the format of my dog eating through my Starlink satellite cable, and then that trend's continued as he decided he wanted to trample me there this week here, and we were on a walk, and dude just ran full speed in the back of my knee and just buckled me down and lit up my spine injuries like a Christmas tree. But I'm managing. I'm just saying these things tend to happen when I start talking about Robert the Doll, because my dog's does never normally done something like that, and he doesn't. He's chewed through a cord before, but it's he was doing some puppy business at that time. You know what I mean? So who knows? But yeah, so Robert the Doll coming up this Sunday, The Curse of Robert the Doll. I'm going to go kind of a deep dive into the history of Robert the Doll, other folks' curses relative to my experiences with the curse, and that sort of thing. But as you can tell, I immediately get I don't like talking about him. And again, once I start talking about him, I plan a show, a bunch of weird shit happens. I'm like, your dog literally tries to Nicole Brown Simpson
to murk me, dude. He's like, I'm gonna murk this dude. I'm gonna take him out.
Yeah.
Nah, so that's my Patreon coming up this Sunday at 8 p.m. Operation GCD Sundays. That'll be a link in the description, the show notes. I got all of your links there as well, Julia. But I got that one coming up, and then I'm gonna I'm doing a lot of murder here on my Sunday series, because I'm doing a Buffalo Jared Revisa show the following Sunday, and then the following Sunday after that, I'm going to be getting into a 2-part series on a fellow that I encountered in Great Falls, Montana, a cannibalistic, kid-diddling, psychopathic, homicidal serial killer who may or may not have fed me a human burger at Hardee's circa 2000.
Oh God, what the fuck is this?
His name's Nathaniel Barjona. I would later come face to face with this man. He is pure evil. I could see it in his eyes in the Cascade County Jail.
Burger?
Yeah, so apparently he worked at Hardee's on the late night, and that's the only time I'd eat at Hardee's on Central Avenue on the late night, and especially when I was drunk, which was most every day of the week that I was off work. And then I would later encounter this fella in the Cascade County Jail, and I came eye to eye because I was mouthing off to the cops, and they're like, we got a way to deal with you, buddy. I got pulled over for DUI, and I wouldn't do any tests, and they were already upset with me about that. I'm like, you guys can be butthurt. Take your test elsewhere. I'm not doing it. And like, we'll lock you up next to the fucking kid-diddling, cannibalistic, psychopathic serial killer. I'm like, and of course I didn't keep my mouth shut. I'm like, you guys are fucked up, man. I'm like, this is crazy.
Wait, when is this coming out?
Oh, that's going to be in 3 weeks. No, next Sunday is going to be The Legends of Buffalo Jared Revisa.
Oh, which for is God's sake,
my former stalker, and he tried to be my PR rep. This is before he went on a transpocalypse multi-state stabbing spree, and today allegedly sits today in the Bridgewater State Hospital in Massachusetts, despite his court cases not being available on the public dockets. So you'll have that. The guy he murdered, it's important to note, the guy he murdered hired him as his PR rep. Just saying.
JJ Vance, not the vice president, but the Forrest Gump of the conspiracy theory community.
That ma'am, I will accept that their title, and we're proud of.
Okay,
so this is the homicidal, cannibalistic, psychopathic, kid-diddling serial killer in Great Falls, Montana, that may or may not have fed me human burgers at Hardee's in the late night.
Dude, look at that double chin. That is the double chin of somebody who eats human burgers.
Oh, big time. Big time.
That he also, look at that waddle.
He also apparently fed him up at a local church barbecue. So I got back from Saudi Arabia. I'll close out on this one for you. I'll close you out on this one for you. So I get back from Saudi Arabia. So I married an axe murderer. Michael Myers' character in the film, his mother, learns of a serial killer, that he ends up marrying from the Weekly World News, as she calls it, the paper. I'm standing in a grocery store in Great Falls, Montana, about 5 years after that film there, or so 4 years, year 2001, I guess 5 years or so. Call it June of 2001. I just got back from a 4-month deployment to Saudi Arabia in the Air Force. I'm standing in the grocery store line. There's the tabloids, and it says, Montana man murders child. I literally just got home the day before. Montana man murders child and feeds him up at church barbecue. I'm like, no, come on. I'm in Montana. I open it up, and the tagline of the article says Great Falls. I'm like, fuck. I yell, fuck you. I'm in Great Falls. I'm like, oh shit, I'm in public too. And I go on to read it, and this dude, Nathaniel Barjona, killing folks, kid diddling. He was a janitor at a school. He was already a kid diddler in Massachusetts, changed his name, somehow got a job at an elementary school. There's a lot to be said there. That'll be a fun tale.
Oh my
that's
God.
3 weeks. So.
JJ, what the fuck?
So I definitely recommend folks check that out. Check out Cosmic Peaches podcast and some of our collaborations on the Occult Rejects. And any last statements before we call her in here?
JJ Vance, not the vice president, has eaten actual ass. Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to come back in the future.
And thank you. I appreciate it. We'll definitely be back here in the future as a guest for sure, Julie. I appreciate your time and conversation. And don't vote for me in 2028.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, but check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.